Can you all see me? Testing, 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 testing. Can you hear me? Hello, hello. Nice. Okay, there we go. And so we're getting started. Good to see you all. It's been a little while. I skipped the last 1,000 mark. Now here we are at 7,000. I'm happy with where the channel has gone. The rate of growth is actually pretty good, given that I basically release 3 videos a year at this rate. Yeah, no, I'm glad to see that there's still people enjoying the channel, coming back for more. People seem to keep coming back to some of those other videos as resources, and I hope to keep creating resources people could come back to in the future. So that's definitely the direction I plan for the channel. Yeah, the next series I think is going to be really good. It's actually like a huge undertaking, but the next series is essentially laying out a modern theory of anarchism. That is to say, synthesizing all of the older texts and concepts from anarchism historically, but also taking into consideration the advancements that have been made in the meantime. Not only advancements within anarchist theory, which is to say diverse influences from Black anarchism to queer anarchism to anarcho-feminism and so on, but also in things which are ostensibly unrelated to anarchism, which is to say complex systems analysis and chaos theory and concepts of emergence. And that stuff has been worked in a little bit in my past videos back in a Change and Revolution more than anything else. But it is definitely going to feature within the series more broadly. So that is what I'm working on right now, and that is going to be a 3-part series as it is currently planned. It's possible that part 1, 2, or 3 could balloon wildly out of control, in which case then it would turn into a 4, 5, 6-part series. Who knows? I certainly wouldn't stop making the videos as they were being produced, given that, you know, it's on a very worthy topic. So if it balloons out of control, we just get a mini-part video series on a modern theory of anarchism. And that will be a theory of anarchism as a body, a lens of analysis, but also as just sort of a body of theory and critique. And then also the second part will be an actual theory of anarchy, which is to say, obviously, you're not going to be able to make a blueprint for anarchy, but a theory of how and why anarchy might function the way that it will. We can't know for sure, obviously, what it will look like, but we have some ideas about what it must look like, given that our means and our ends have to be connected. So then part 3 and so on will be more praxis. I remember when I finished constructing the revolution, there was a ton of people who were like, wanted more detail. They wanted even more detail. And that's fine. Constructing the revolution was intended as a strategic overview, not as a super detailed guide. It can't tell you what to do in every situation. And even this new praxis will not be able to tell you what to do in every situation. That's impossible. But it will be a more tactical guide. It's going to get more into the nitty gritty of the things that need to be done based upon your conditions. I explained it just the other day as like it's like a choose your own adventure book almost, but with your conditions in mind. It's like, you know, intakes your conditions, outputs suggested possible actions kind of thing. So that being said, that is kind of the overview of the work that I'm doing right now. I understand it's obviously taking a long time. I have a very busy life. That's the truth. I still work 2 jobs. I have more than one partner. I have a lot in my life that I'm doing at all times, and I'm constantly working on the scripts, and they're constantly being done, but I'm trying as best I can to balance it all together. And I'm sorry if that probably, makes these videos take a long time. Anyway, I think we're good to like move on to some of the questions that have already been left. I said elsewhere that I would focus in on questions asked by patrons first, then people in the stream, and then people that had asked on Twitter or elsewhere. So yeah, that's the order I'm going to go. So I've got a few questions here. For some reason on my end the chat isn't scrolling, but I don't know if it's not active or what. Oh yeah, I should probably also link this on Twitter before I get off on my long rambles as I do. Give me just a few moments while I get that set up. Okay, good enough. There it is. Cool and stuff. Boom. It's in places now. It's in places. Okay, there we go. So let's look at the first question that's asked by the patrons. The first one that was asked was the Jovian. Hey, Daniel, I know you've already made a 4-part series on the topic of state socialism being a dead end, but would you consider doing a follow-up that focuses on the actually existing socialist, he has in quotation marks, states that are still around and how much or how little socialist they actually are? There are plenty of people who still use them as an example of Leninism and state socialism working, and I think someone as well read as you would be perfect at setting the record straight. Yeah. I've been asked this question quite a bit because I think The State is Counter-Revolutionary is the most popular video series that I've produced so far, likely because it's a very important series of things for people to know. I mean, especially for anarchists to know, but even in a more general sense for just the left to understand about the history of what took place. And so I've got this question a lot, and pretty much every time what I've said was that video series, even though it was very important, was very draining. For me, historical research is, it's interesting and it's sometimes enjoyable to read. It's almost always very enlightening to read, very important. But for me, historical research doesn't give me the driving passion that theory or praxis does. Those two things really drive me, and I have a lot more passion to write those pieces. Whereas with the historical pieces, I think also it probably is involved in the fact that I was reading about these really dark revolutionary failures, right? Where they turned on their own citizens and all of that. And so that was very draining for me, and it makes me not inclined to want to produce more videos on that topic. And that's not to say that it won't ever happen. It's something I would definitely consider doing later, but at the moment, I have other videos I would prefer to be producing instead of more of the videos about socialist states, right? That's my general answer. The answer is not no, but not until I run out of other ideas. Next person, Paste, asks, how much do you believe the success of anarchism depends on convincing individual people in conversation or arguments about its benefits, practicality, necessity, or any other virtues, and why? So yeah, I actually thought about this one because I read this one before the stream, and I thought about this one for a little while. It's sort of complicated because yes, the answer is absolutely yes. You should be trying to convince individual people. Okay. Like you may think that it's meaningless when you convince one person, but that is a naive presumption, because one person might go on to convince another 3 or 4 or 5 people who each go on to convince another 3 or 4 or 5 people. And each one of these individual conversations, which may indeed seem very frivolous or pointless, and you may convince yourself is completely meaningless, many of them may end up being more important than you could ever know. Not only because that person may go on to change other people's minds, but because it's important for every individual's political transformation to have these moments where somebody who has a radically different worldview from them has to actually hold them to account, and they are forced to actually determine for themselves what they want to do with their future, and how they want to interact. And it may very well be that many of these individual interactions are with really important people in your lives, and that may indeed make it even more important for you to have these conversations. So it can be very beneficial. It's practical, and in a broader sense, it's going to be necessary, because it's not just the mechanical turning of wheels here. A social revolution requires the interaction of people in mass numbers, and you can't always just have a megaphone where everybody listens all at the same time. You need to take the opportunities as they come to you. And often, might I add, and I'm kind of repeating what I said in the video, The Value of Dispute, right? Which you can go kind of watch that if you want an even more in-depth argument for this position. But often these conversations that you have that aren't really public, but are in fact between you and like one other person, you should try not to be intimidated by those. And you should instead try to approach those as learning opportunities, both for you to learn what perhaps the opposing side believes about these things, and for it to really have a very low risk in a general sense. And also for you to hone your rhetoric, right? To get better and better, to say, oh, this did or did not work in this conversation I had. And the only, the only real downside that ever ends up coming from it is just if you feel humiliated or that person's opinion perhaps has changed. But each time you try to argue better, you try to conceive the points a little better. What you'll find is that you will develop better and better rhetoric. And you will actually often find yourself driven to go do the necessary research to have better rhetoric in the future. So, I think it's valuable. But what I will say is, don't get it in your mind that it's just a series of these individual conversations that do the process of transformation. This is, I think, the major caveat that has to be said here. Because if you see this as the main vector of transformation, you are not going to do the extremely important construction of dual power, which is necessary for a revolutionary juncture to take place. And might I add, I think this is why it's easier for statists to do electoral politics, where they are handed a megaphone and then they just get to, get a bunch of people sort of vaguely on board in a mass all at once. Whereas we actually are trying to build a competing system, you might say, a system that is attempting to do away with the previous system, that is actually attempting to go into systems conflict with that system. That means that we have to see ourselves as the constructors of this new world. We have to keep in mind that this is our work to do, that it's in our hands, and it's not just about convincing your dad about anarchism. It's about building the structures which could possibly bring about a revolutionary future, an anarchist future. So that's the answer. It's obviously very complex. I could probably continue going on about it, but let's see what else we got. What are your thoughts on psychology? Do you think that the study of it has anything to offer anarchist thought? Well, I mean, what are my thoughts on psychology? It's like, where do I start? I should say psychology is a field that has a lot, I think, is super important. And what I've said before is that I actually think psychology is a very challenging field. It's very difficult. And I say that coming from the sort of physics-brained perspective. And You know, a lot of people see physics and they see quantum mechanics and all that is very, very challenging. And it's challenging, but it's challenging in a different way. Our formulas have solutions. I just have to work through the mechanics. I can apprehend the data relatively, not easily, but like with a pretty high degree of confidence and relatively low error in most cases. That makes this, it makes it, sorry, got off my brain, derailed for just a moment. Whereas in like sociology and psychology, the studies that would need to be done to come to similar sorts of high confidence conclusions as to physics are pretty much impossible to conduct, and we should not want to conduct a large number of them. Lots of them are highly unethical and, you know, may not be worth it at all. So that's just, you know, my first kind of, you ask, what are my thoughts on psychology? That's like one of my first thoughts. Very challenging. But what it is discovering is extremely important. The answers that it's finding. How does a conscious mind work? What is the actual functioning of a mind in its daily life? How does it cope with things? How does it process through events? How does it think? You know, these are amazingly important questions. So it can't be like dismissed, but it should be said, because they cannot apprehend all of their data in this extremely high confidence way, it means there is quite a bit of wiggle room in how those studies are therefore, you know, formed and conducted, and what conclusions are drawn from the results. And yeah, so there is a high degree of wiggle room within this field to be used for a variety of different means to prove a lot of different conclusions. This is not to say that there is not all kinds of valid scientific means by which they can discard bad conclusions and, you know, do strong hypothesis rejection. Not trying to say any of that, but it does have a lot more of this wiggle room. You know, it's harder to work out that what you found is something entirely valid or perhaps incidental. And this is something we found with the history of, especially the recent history of psychology, is a lot of these experiments, which appear really compelling at first, on further analysis, we're finding that, you know, not all of them, but a lot of them are kind of going by the wayside because they were not as rigorous as we had originally thought they were. And a lot of what they concluded were also called into question. So then if the second part, do you think that the study of it has anything to offer anarchist thought? 100%. Yes. In fact, I will be quoting some amount of a psychiatrist. There's 3 psychiatrists that wrote a book called A General Theory of Love, which I will be citing in the next series of videos, because they actually have a lot of valuable things to say about how the society is not like an accident. Society is the result of a highly developed limbic brain and the neocortical thinking, and really going into the neurological reasons why that society is actually wired into human brains and all of that. And should be said, the deprivation of these communal ties do terrible damage to people's minds. It's a sort of widespread social sickness that we are becoming this atomized. So the book is also highly anti-capitalist, and it's accidentally, I might say, or maybe even on purpose, honestly. But so yeah, I think those fields are worth listening to, and they have valid things to say. And the conclusions of things like neurobiology are quite a bit more solid, right? Like they're, you know, and then that forms a lot of the conclusions that are taking place within psychology and vice versa. So, what does it have to do with anarchist thought? Right. We need to know how that people's minds work to ever possibly, number one, convince a great deal of people, but also number two, to even possibly build this society of liberation that we speak of, right? How are we even going to build that society if we don't even know what is good for humans to begin with? And that partially requires us to understand the human mind, to understand mass psychology and sociology and things like this. These are not by any means frivolous disciplines. These are, even though they have the problem I said about not being able to have a high degree of confidence and not always being able to do good hypothesis rejection, that does not mean that they're not crucially important. And people should study psychology and understand it so that they can understand how indeed we can be better radicals and better organizers and spread radical ideology faster and more efficiently, and in a way that's also not exploitative, or you get what I'm saying. It has a great deal of value, and I think that a lot more work could be done in doing psychological analysis of revolutions and the revolutionary mind. What leads somebody to go from a position of normalcy to a revolutionary mindset, class consciousness, as it's been called. Yeah, very interesting questions, very important questions. So, next one. I recently read Ursula Le Guin's rendition of the Tao Te Ching and really enjoyed it. If you've read it, do you think there's an intersection between philosophical Taoism and anarchism? Well, first I'll say I have read the Tao Te Ching, but it was years ago. I was probably like 17 or 18. I still have the copy. It's a tiny one. And it was interesting, but I think it went over my head at that age. I've thought a lot about the things that I was reading in the Tao Te Ching and trying to understand them through a broader philosophical lens. And I think that Taoism, in a general sense, is one of the most coherent of the religions. But you say philosophical Taoism. So in philosophical Taoism, I don't know. I have complex feelings about Taoism that sort of have overlap with my feelings about Stoicism, Greek Stoicism, as well as my feelings about pessimism, as well as my feelings about Buddhism, which that may seem like a weird list, but they've all got this thing in common where they say life is suffering, so how do we escape the suffering? And all of them, almost all of them, come to this very similar conclusion, which is just like, accept what your bounds are, stop desiring greater than that which you can have. If you can, stop desiring it, in the case of Buddhism, for example. And this, I think, can lead to some kind of conservative notions at times. But that should be said. It should be said that Taoism contains a much more radical current within it. A current which also is maybe even said to be highly deconstructive, insofar that it can take apart a lot of kind of foolish systems of thought just by the way that the Tao is considered to be ineffable. The way is actually something that can never be perfectly achieved. It sort of gives question to strict legal structures and authoritarian hierarchy and all of that. So yeah. I won't pretend to know more about it than I do, but from what I've read, I think it's my first impressions would be to say that it's going to have some components which are going to be very well suited to anarchism and may even been an anarchism of the time, and other components which I question whether they are telling us that they might lead someone to conservative notions. This idea of accepting your bounds, not desiring, wanting to escape suffering rather than live with a world that contains suffering. But this is because I'm an absurdist, right? I'm like a Camus style existentialist. So I'm like, no, we don't flee from the suffering. The suffering is part of life. You know, that struggle is what makes us human. It is like us bravely confronting reality and imagining Sisyphus happy, you might say. So that's kind of my response. But yeah, I'd be very interested to have a conversation with people more about that. So those are the patron questions. Now it looks like we've got a considerable amount of stuff built up in the chat. Let's go take a look. Cool. Okay. Would you consider doing Colin B says, would you consider doing a collab with Radical Reviewer? I've been watching his channel lately and he's pretty cool. Actually, I've always liked Radical Reviewer. I think he does a really good job introducing what would be relatively complex theory and introducing people to works they probably never would have heard of or never would have read, including oppositional literature. And I think he does a very good job of presenting the anarchist or libertarian socialist view on most of these issues. I've personally never had a problem with Radical Reviewer in my videos, but I do remember there was recently some controversy, Radical Reviewer, the way they were acting on Twitter. I won't comment on any of that. Just really commenting on the YouTube channel. Would I collaborate with Radical Reviewer? Perhaps. Radical Reviewer has not seemed to show that this channel a whole lot of interest. So I don't know because he has seemed maybe to be more less sectarian, you might say, less polemic than I am. I'm definitely not trying. He'll do videos where he'll like cooperate with people that are of more authoritarian backgrounds in order to like make videos about certain texts. And, that's all well and good. I don't really judge him for that. And I think he generally does a good idea of providing the counterbalance in those videos as they exist. But that would definitely not be what I would do. I think we can all see that from my approach. So yeah, I guess if he were interested, I'd consider it. Yeah. The second one, Colin B also asks, where do you work other than YouTube? I don't even consider this one of my jobs. Yeah, I am. I work both at a cannabis dispensary and I am a tutor. So those are the two jobs that I do. This one, you're right. I guess I work 3 jobs then, huh? Yeah, there we go. That's my life right now. Once the Patreon starts making enough money, I will probably just quit one of those jobs. So yeah, that is the plan. And hopefully that happens because I would like to devote even more time to the channel. In fact, one of the real reasons my productivity is lower is because I don't get long spans of time where I get to just sit in front of the work. Instead, everything I'm always, being interrupted. It's like I get a little span here, 2 hours here, and then boom, and then 3 hours here, and then boom. So I'm constantly kind of being distracted, and it's kind of hard to get into the flow when you feel, you're always being pulled one way or another. So if the Patreon started to be able to pay my bills and I could quit one of my jobs, I could probably increase my production rate. But are you leaving this stream up after it's over? Oh, it's going to be saved on the channel. Yes, people will be able to see the stream. I assume that's what you mean. Otherwise, I'm not exactly sure what that would mean. What if I'm a patron and I ask the same question on Twitter and here in the stream? Huh? What then, Daniel? Oh, well, I guess tell me you're a patron. Hey, I'm a patron, but I'm saying it over here. Sure, that'll work. Sam, you got your wish. There it is. Kind of. I'd also love to see a proper analysis of the C&T FAI in revolutionary Catalonia. Any plans of doing that? Oh, yeah. I've thought about that numerous times. In fact, I've thought about at some point doing a series on what I would consider more successful projects. On the C&T FAI, talking about the free territories of Ukraine, talking about the KPAM in Korea, talking about the Zapatistas, talking about Rojava, talking about a bunch of also the smaller projects that never get spoken about. There is a lot of content to be had in analyzing things that went really right and giving people a vision of the right way to do things, or at least the more right way to do things than what has been done in the state. So the answer to that question is absolutely yes. In fact, probably I would do those before I would go back to doing more The State is Counter-Revolutionary. As I've said, researching for The State is Counter-Revolutionary is exhausting. Anyway, anarchism has become a growing self-reported ideological bloc based on the membership survey. What should anarchists make of this? What is your analysis or suggestions in light of this? I don't know what the membership survey is referring to, Sam. I don't know. Are you talking about DSA, perhaps? Yes, DSA convention. I just realized that I had quote unquote top comments on. I just thought that the chat wasn't even moving, right? Like that was the way, that's what I thought was going on. I was like, huh, wow, there's really just, 30 people are watching and it's going that slow. Yeah, apparently I had the wrong chat option on this entire time. So I probably like skipped people's questions. Oh my God. Okay, let's go back here. Yeah. A serious question. Considering DSA's near 100,000 near 100,000 size, and their convention just wrapped up, in which the LSC made significant gains, and anarchism has become a growing self-reported. There we go. See, it turns out when you see all the comments, everything makes more sense. So what I will say is the DSA is like kind of troubling me lately. The leadership does not. It seems like things are trending more authoritarian in the DSA. I wouldn't call them an authoritarian organization quite yet, because they have these very strong caucuses, and the LSC is very powerful and all of this stuff. But I will say that there are some troubling things taking place towards the top of the DSA, insofar as that I keep hearing there's just a lot of power politics taking place, and it seems as if everybody is still obsessed with an electoral program. And anyway, what I will say is having a surge of the LSC is good. And I would like to see the LSC push DSA in a more libertarian socialist direction, as I would hope it can be. But I'm also wondering, why has it not been taking place this long? They've been a significant bloc for quite a while, and it kind of, and I don't mean to in any way disparage LSC. But it seems to me LSC spends a lot of time, from what I've seen, talking about the electoral politics. More, I should say, than most libertarian socialist organizations would, and certainly anarchist organizations. Second here. So yeah, I feel like they probably talk about electoral politics a little more than is kind of my comfort level, but I understand they're engaging in the DSA. It's a constant topic, and there are better and worse candidates if you're a libertarian socialist. So kind of get it. I haven't really made my opinions, I don't think, clear about my reasoning for anti-electoralism, but it's something I'll probably need to talk about more at length. I would like to see all those people in LSC go and join anarchist organizations, so that anarchist organizations could begin to build, and we could really see that. I'd also like to see a lot of them join, for example, Symbiosis. That would be really nice. But I also understand their argument is that there needs to be this libertarian socialist pushback within the DSA, so that it does not become authoritarian. So I guess only time will tell. I think that the trajectory of the DSA is going to have to tell us a lot about what the correct strategy, both being in the DSA and being adjacent to the DSA, will be. Different locals seem to have very different politics. The locals, for example, in Los Angeles are quite a bit different than the locals in New York City, and way different than the ones that are in the Midwest. So I would say for now, I'm trying not to make too sweeping a statements as to the DSA's future or the Libertarian Socialist Caucus's future. But it does seem to me that anarchists need to be joining anarchist organizations. That doesn't mean that they can't be in the DSA. I've been in the DSA. I've done social insertion, as they say in a specificism, into the DSA. And I don't think that's like a bad thing necessarily, but I would like if it weren't the main organization that anarchists were working within. I don't think that it's an organization that's going to be conducive to the ends that anarchists are looking for. It's good for popularizing socialism broadly, but it does not seem to me that it is going in the direction of anti-statism, which is what anarchists should be demanding. So yeah, that's really not even a sufficient answer to the question, because there's just so much to be said about that. And yeah, I would just like more of them to join anarchist organizations. So let's see. If anarchists begin to gain strength in America, serious repression will follow. Do you think that anarchists in America should take cybersecurity and secrecy more seriously in advance? Yeah, yes. As we discussed in Constructing the Revolution, I consider intelligence and information security and things like that to be very important. If we understand that we are fighting a systems conflict, then we have to understand that we are being surveilled. Intelligence is trying to gather information on us. We should be developing our own counterintelligence. We should be developing our own intelligence. We should be developing an information security culture. And I say that knowing that sometimes it can go a little overboard. Some people can misinterpret what the actual important information is to keep secure and what even being secure means. And they think paranoia is information security. But that doesn't really change the fact that information security is necessary, and that we should be trying to think more in a way where we are trying to get counterintelligence, and that we are trying to ourselves learn about the enemy. We should be trying to gain more and more information about the heads of all of the firms and companies that we are targeting, all of the firms that work with the state. We should be trying to develop the power maps that help us understand where the weak points are in the system. So I take those things very seriously, and I think they are very important, and further than that, absolutely necessary, that we are going to, in order for us to succeed. What do you think of debate as a platform? Do you think it's worthy as a means of exposing ideas to more people? Also, would you chat with Hakeem? See, the thing I don't like about debate culture is this right here. It's like if anybody has said anything worth listening to at all, it almost seems like the comments end up with people. I mean, no offense, I'm not trying to tell you off or anything, but like, the comments end up with people being like, "You man, when are you going to debate Vosh? When are you going to debate Hakeem?" and blah 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 blah. I wouldn't rule out doing so, but also it's really not the direction I'm going for as a content producer. I find that most of the time these debates just turn out to be blood sports. They don't typically end up being even good debates. They end up just kind of the two people misrepresenting one another, or it devolves into a shouting match, or I feel like often nothing much of any validity comes out of the situation other than a sort of cynical posturing of identities. Now, is that to say that I wouldn't ever do it in the future? Maybe. I think one of the issues is that, well, with Vosh at least, I don't even know what I would debate right now, or rather, I would need to have a better idea of what it is that we would even be disputing specifically. As for Hakeem, honestly, looking at his channel, I don't find him to be a good faith actor. I think that he is presenting regurgitated authoritarian state positions. I think that, like most authoritarian leftists, he is regurgitating the propaganda from dead states. So, like, he's regurgitating Bolshevik propaganda. He's when it's like the same people that if the US government reported some statistic, they would immediately say, no, well, it's the US government. They're going to say whatever that's obviously been published to benefit them. I can't believe you would believe the US government would tell you the truth. And then, well, the USSR said it. Oh shit, it's all true. Okay. Oh, it's been revealed. Oh, they got it out of the secret vaults. It's like these states are developing a lot of this data purposely to be deceptive. They're developing narratives to be deceptive. Part of intelligence is creating these extremely reliable narratives against your enemy. it's like the whole point is putting together a case to make yourself look justified and to make the enemy look like the most vile scum on earth. So like, I feel like when I watch his videos, they were not convincing to me. I mean, I don't know. That might be mean that we actually would have a decent debate, because at least I can pinpoint exactly what we disagree on, and that's almost everything probably. But am I looking to have that debate? No. I, once again, do not think that's the direction I'm trying to go with this. Not to say I will never do any debates, but I do not want to become a debate bro. I would much rather this channel remain a sort of end of the pipeline academic focus on theory and praxis. So long answer to your short question. I guess I'll finish by saying, what do you think of debate as a platform? Do you think it's a worthy means of exposing ideas? Okay, so I didn't really ever answer that. I got off because you mentioned Hakeem. What do you think of debate as a platform? I think debate can be a valid platform, much in the exact same way that I was just discussing earlier about convincing people that you speak to. Helps you develop tighter rhetoric. It helps often people get to hear the arguments. A lot of people learn by hearing conversations and discussing with people. That's the way a lot of people learn the things they need to know. Historically, lots and lots of workers and workers' movements couldn't even read, and yet they knew quite a bit about these topics through conversation, and probably also the witnessing of conversation. So with that in mind, does debate have that valid purpose? 100%. And if I think it honestly, I'm more inclined to possibly do a debate if I think it's actually going to be a debate and not a shouting match, that we're actually going to engage in good faith with one another. You know, that doesn't mean that I need them to be overly charitable or anything, but I want some expectation that this is not just blood sports to them, because I don't care to get into a knife fight with somebody on a live stream. But debate can be valuable, and it can be a way of exposing people ideas. 100%. Yeah. Boom Blaster Bot says, with your The State is Counter-Revolutionary series in mind, how are Cuba and Vietnam similar or different to China and the USSR in how their states betrayed the revolution? So Cuba and Vietnam are, I would not group them in together, talking about their trajectories in a general sense. And how similar are they to China and the USSR? I would say neither of them are particularly similar. I would say, I would say neither of them are super similar. Cuba is mostly just a social democracy. It's a one-party social democracy. And in fact, they've got a lot of things done right for the most part. Like they have a lot of necessary social services. There's actually a very, very robust democratic representation, nowhere near the scale that an anarchist would desire, but at least pretty good as a starting point, focused around these democratic local assemblies, which actually do actually get what they want a significant portion of the time. So there's some promising things within Cuba. The problem is that Cuba is not moving towards more control of the means of production by the workers. They are moving like all of these nations, everything listed, Cuba, Vietnam, China, and the USSR, starting from their beginning to the time that they either come to an end or where they are present day, they are constantly undergoing the process of becoming more state capitalist or regular capitalist. Okay. And this is in Cuba and Vietnam are no different. Cuba and Vietnam are both undergoing market liberalization and have been undergoing market liberalization for an extended period of time at this point. They are not doing anything going in the opposite direction. Or rather, if they are, it's nowhere near as much as they are going in the direction of state capitalism. And it should be said, if we're talking about China, for example, I mean, China is now moving past state capitalism into just regular capitalism. I don't think that they are like fully transitioned, because there's still a lot of central state control over these corporations as they stand. But I think that what you're going to find is over time, the pressures are going to continue to with them conceding to more market liberalization, to more of these firms continuing to have traditional capitalist managerial styles. And I say this not because I'm just like trying to score one on China or whatever, or score one on any of these states. It's just what history shows. We would have to believe that all of the trends that have happened and all of the trends that are currently happening are just somehow going to reverse at some point. That all of the natural pressures that have led to the, the moderately socialist, conditions devolving into state capitalism, devolving then into capitalism, we'd have to be told that, like, for some reason that happened in all these other occasions, but it's not going to happen this time. They're just going to change course and just flip the whole damn thing around and go the opposite direction at a certain point. There's no good reason to believe that. There's every reason, using anarchist analysis, to understand that won't happen. So I think they're kind of all falling victim to the same things, but in very different ways. Cuba has maintained perhaps some of the most valuable social programs and democratic responses. Vietnam seems like it's a little more authoritarian, but it has undergone an extensive amount of market liberalization. And the parts that they typically laud as being representations of socialism or whatever are indeed just state capitalism. They're state ownership of these firms. There's not direct democratic management of these firms. Therefore, it is not management of the means of production by the workers. Therefore, it cannot qualify as socialism, period. So I won't get off and further down that tangent. I feel like anybody who has spoken to me in any platform and has heard me get down this tangent. So I'm just going to move on. And how their states betrayed the revolution. Yeah, that's what I would say about it. Will you ever do a collaboration with St. Andrew? Yes, indeed. I may. Yeah, me and St. Andrew have been friends for a little while online. And I've supported his work since very, very, very early, when literally all he had on his channel was poetry. So I am happy to see St. Andrew blow up like he has. And yes, 100%. We have discussed possible collaborations that we want to do in the future. And yeah, that'll happen eventually. Been reading, Harry Stoddard says, been reading a book by Langdon Winner on the philosophy of instrumentality and technology. You briefly touch on this in The State is Counter-Revolutionary. It seems to be an assumption among some leftists, even anarchists, that production will proceed on an industrial basis with similar rational techniques and organization. Maybe you have thoughts on this or are aware of critiques or efforts to develop alternative methods. This is a pretty big question. So I'm trying to figure out exactly how to frame a response here. But the idea that production will proceed on an industrial basis. So, I mean, I suppose my approach to answering this is basically the social ecological approach. And that is to say, we should be looking to refashion technology to our needs as we reorganize society. Rational techniques, perhaps there will be some rationality, of course, to the ways that these things will be built and put together. I imagine that naturally there will be logistics and supply chains which will just simply arise. Not everything is going to be fully localized. Not everything is going to be fully decentralized, mostly because under anarchism, we presuppose that people will have control over the way that their society is actually managed and organized and constructed and deconstructed and so on. So will it involve some industry? Probably some industry. The amount that we have now, hopefully not. It's hard to imagine how it's going to be effective if it does, and that it will not just reproduce exactly what has taken place. But what we mean, of course, by industry is going to be a contentious part of this discussion, and delineations between light industry and heavy industry and all of those things. I personally would not get into that too much, other than to say any of these things should be able to be used so long as they contribute to a liberatory future where people are autonomous and have dignified lives, where they have control over their society. And insofar as that we are not, of course, damaging the ecology to an extensive degree. Now, the industry as it stands now, 100% cannot be continued. And this is actually a big part of why that I often say that this is a systems conflict, because I view a lot of the fact that they've built out these supply chains, built out these logistics, built out all of these this infrastructure to support these this hierarchical ecocidal approach to social and industrial management, means that if the further they develop, the stronger the enemy system is getting, essentially. That's what it means. Some of it is going to be able to be repurposed, certain roads and streets and blah, 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 and factories. Maybe this factory is fine, and so on, right? We might be able to find pieces here and there. But really, one of the places I diverge so enormously from these statists is that the statists have this teleological progression towards the productive forces. You just need to capitalism really, really hard, and then you'll do a communism. Like, that's what the joke I said the other day. It's like that they believe all you have to do, the productive capacities are just neutral. All these tools are just neutral. These supply chains and infrastructures, they don't mimic the centralization of capitalist and a hierarchical society. We just seize them, and ta-da, they're going to do the things we want them to do now. And it's like, that's nonsense. Like, that is ridiculous. In fact, to create a liberatory society, it is almost certain we're going to have to demolish, even if we were to seize all of this, a huge amount of demolition of these old structures. Literally, I mean old structures, not power structures, literally structures that are built in such a way that they're only there because they were part of some central supply chain, or managing them in the way that their floor plan is constructed would actually just reproduce all of the previous conditions, or can only be properly managed or can only be properly used under certain managerial styles, for example. More than people probably think of this has been done in the way our society has been constructed. And we were going to have to actively reverse a lot of that. So that's the answer to the question. That's the way that I would respond to it. There's a lot more that can be said about that. It's a big topic. But so what I would say is, one thing that I want to dive into soon is really thinking more about the infrastructural supply chain logistic approach to it. And I'm going to read more Mumford and Bookchin on urbanization and cities, and try to apply complex systems analysis and concepts of emergence. But at the moment, that's pretty well where my mind is on that. Tim Wolf asks, are unions dead? Should we try and rebuild the labor movement and use them to spread anarchist ideas, or spread anarchist ideas in other social movements? I do not believe unions are dead. Now, the unions of the past, the major unions, the big ones, dead in the revolutionary sense. Yes, they are dead in the revolutionary sense, unfortunately. But places like the IWW offer the possibility of a resurrection and a new generation of the creation of anarchist unions, and the application of syndicalist techniques from the past could very well bring back an anarchist trade unionist movement. But I would hope to see them not be as reductionist as the previous ones. And this is not me being like, they were racist and sexist and all of that. In those senses, they were often far ahead of time. But it's instead to say that they just really thought that, prioritize class politics, organize the workers, do a general strike. That's the revolution, baby. Like, I know they thought there was more to it than that. I was an anarcho-syndicalist, so I'm not trying to straw man them. But like, those other issues, the social issues, sexism or patriarchy, white supremacy, ableism, cis heteronormativity, and so on. Those were all things that they thought did need to be solved and were representations of hierarchy, but that they could wait until after the class revolution. And what they really needed to get everybody together on was a unification upon the class revolution. If we build unions in the modern day, we cannot take that perspective. They need to be holistically intertwined with the democratic mechanisms that we create, as well as the cooperatives that we should be creating, as well as the militias that we should be creating, and so on. These things need to be intertwined into a structure. They need to be confederated together so that the unions do not themselves seek to become standalone power structures. So yes, indeed, we can rebuild the labor movement. Yes, it can be used to spread anarchist ideas. And last on the last one, spreading anarchist ideas in other social movements. This is, to me, one of the greatest values of specificism. Specificism advocates this concept called a social insertion. And I used this term earlier, but the idea of social insertion is you have like this home organization, which is an explicitly anarchist organization. And historically, what platformists would do is only have you organize in that. And they would have people sort of hold off from broad scale cooperation with other organizations, and especially statist or authoritarian organizations. Whereas what Especificismo suggests is that no, we actually do a great deal of social insertion, joining other organizations, becoming part of them, and trying to bring out the anarchist elements that are within them, trying to drive them towards a more anarchistic viewpoint of the problems that are at hand. So I think that that's highly valuable. The answer to spreading anarchist ideas in other social movements is an emphatic yes. For me and for specificism in a general sense, the true crux is finding out which organizations to do so and which organizations not to do so. And some dispute is sometimes had within specificist organizations answering that question. Okay, next. Anarchist Federation asks, to what degree do you believe the discussion between synthesis and platformist anarchism is relevant to the movement today? Are adjectives useful or harmful? This is actually an excellent question. It is like steeped in kind of like, it's steeped in a knowledge of what these two tendencies actually represent and where we're at trying to ask questions about them. Because I actually agree that the question is really, is that split relevant in the modern day? So what happened with me, I kept having this experience where I would be reading about synthesis anarchism and reading about platformism, and I'd be saying to myself, do these necessarily disagree with one another? Like, what's really happening in these discussions, right? Like, can't I just make a synthesis platform and then we stick to that? I think the answer, I've now discovered, the answer is no, actually, they can cooperate in the modern day. But historically, they were not able to cooperate because anarchists fought with each other a lot way back in the day. Like in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there was a lot of conflict between the different tendencies of anarchism. Individualist anarchists, anarcho-syndicalists, and libertarian communists really feuded even violently. Like it got pretty out of control, to be honest. When I look back and read some of those stories, I think it's completely ridiculous. Like I think that it was not helpful for anybody in the movement to have been feuding to the degree of violence, especially, and not cooperating. I mean, a little ridiculous. So synthesis anarchism was essentially these anarchists coming to the community and going, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you fighting like this? This is ridiculous." Like, you guys are all just telling us part of the story, right? Like, libertarian communists, you're telling us the ideal future that we're trying to produce. Anarcho-syndicalists, you've got a technique. The technique is how we might get there. Individualist anarchists, you are here to advocate for the rights of the individual and to fight back against calcification of authoritarian structures within our movements. And the synthesis anarchists just basically said, so stop fighting, just work together. You both have a good piece of the puzzle. In the modern day, we're not having that problem, right? I mean, individualist anarchists and social anarchists have disagreements and come to somewhat different conclusions sometimes in their praxis, but we're not like shooting each other in the streets. I mean, I've heard Greece gets pretty out of control about that, but not like it was. in a general sense, those three strains have reduced into like two strains now, where it's kind of social anarchists, which is where the libertarian communists and the anarcho-syndicalists went. They kind of combined into that, and the individualist anarchists stayed as the second strain. And then you had these now we have like two strains, and they don't really feud like the old way. So do we even need synthesis anarchism? I don't know. To me, it almost seems like it's historically oriented in a way that it's not a necessary description for us anymore. When I read it, I find that it's almost obvious, most of the things that they're saying to us now. And perhaps it's because we've absorbed the critiques of the synthesis anarchists. Then, and by contrast, you have platformism. And like I said, you could build, weirdly, a synthesis anarchist platform organization. And in a general sense, I think this has actually become the approach. Like, this is becoming more and more the way that people are approaching this problem. They're creating these anarchist organizations that are welcome for all anarchists, but they are explicitly anarchist organizations. And so I don't know that there's actually a modern conflict between synthesis and platformist anarchism. I think pretty well that's behind us. And then for your second question, are adjectives useful or harmful? I think they're useful insofar as we're delineating what the proposed ideas are. You know, if somebody says, for example, they're like a market anarchist or a mutualist, as compared to someone who says that they're, say, a libertarian communist, that means something. You know, that's not irrelevant. That does lay out a difference in their theoretical structure and their approaches, might I add. And there's lots of similarities, and like, I still think there is a theoretical difference between individualist anarchism and social anarchism, insofar as what they think the responsibility to society is. Social anarchism takes for granted that there is a responsibility to build a better society, and that, you know, that altruism and egoism are both part of the process, but that they're both part of the process. Whereas to a large degree, individualist anarchists don't want to be imposed upon by any how should I put it, like, service to the social good, right? I mean, Max Stirner starts out his entire book rejecting that is what he's doing. He is acting in his own interest in this process. And of course, there are complications insofar as that we get further in and people are like, yes, but it's within our self-interest to do collective good. And that's absolutely true. But we find that these two starting points actually do produce somewhat different theoretical conclusions, and also different conclusions about organization. So you find that individualist anarchists tend to be anti-organizationalist, whereas social anarchists tend to be more pro-organizationalist, you might say. Nobody says that, but organizationalist. And of course, this roots back to the fact that there is kind of a theoretical difference between the two, where they start, where their presumptions start. And with that in mind, I don't think there should be any conflict. I think that individualist anarchists and social anarchists should work in the same organizations together. And I find that in a general sense, individualist anarchists are part of social anarchist organizations. I've not found that there's been a great deal of this conflict. It's mostly within discourse that there is this conflict. And so, yeah, I think, I guess what I will say is adjectives can be useful, helpful, necessary. But another problem is that sometimes people misuse them, where it's like, I'm not a libertarian communist, I'm an anarcho, transhumanist or something. Not picking anybody out in particular here, but it's like, well, you could be both of those, right? Like, you could just mix those two together. They don't necessarily conflict because they're kind of talking about slightly different things. They weave into one another, but they're not exactly the same thing. They're not talking about the exact same topic. Libertarian communism is way broader a box. Anarcho-transhumanism is a lot about a discussion of transhumanism. So they kind of sometimes serve to be confusing. But I think this is also why we get people with profiles filled with like 16 adjectives, before their to explain their political tendency. I personally just want to be accurate. When I refer to myself, I am trying to choose the label that applies to me. And what I would say is, broadly, I am an anarchist. The reason I don't use any of those 3 labels or the 2 labels is because I take things from all over the canon. I use pieces from all over the place and elsewhere, might I add, right? So I just call myself an anarchist. If you were to ask more specifically, what's my praxis? I would say I'm an specificist. Maybe you'd say I'm like an specificist communalist or something, because I think I do believe in a great deal of emphasis upon local democracy being established, or local consensus structures being created very early on, creating these councils very, very early, and trying to recenter community, communal ties, and the recreation of communal ties. So my praxis is kind of like an specificist communalism, where I do lots of social insertion, and I try to create dual power structures and get people involved in creating dual power structures. And I do think there's value in those descriptions, so that people can research, specifically so that people can go and research those strains and learn more about them, and therefore learn about something specific. When I say I'm a specificist, they can now go find out what a specificism is. If I just say I'm an anarchist and I don't want to put labels on myself, well, now they can go explore the terrain, but they may have been interested in my particular approach, which in that case, it would have been better if I would have told them the correct naming of the tendency that I'm under. So yeah, but there you go. That was, like I said, that question was a good question. And that's why I rambled about it for so long. George Turner asks, you mentioned in the Dirty Left Feet interview that you have a list of anarchist and autonomous regions, both historically and today. Is that list accessible anywhere? Yes. I've given it to a bunch of people. I'm going to bring it up right now and put it in the chat. Boom. There it is. So, okay, I'm still catching up, but for anybody who's watching live, it should have just popped up in the chat. Okay, let's go back up. Okay, there you go. That's the list. Next one, Sam follows up. Is it worth putting in effort to engage for the sake of education and dual power organizing with Symbiosis? Yeah, I feel like kind of in the interim questions between that previous one and this one, I've given you most of my answer to that, at least. Is it worth putting in the effort to engage for the sake of education and dual power organizing with Symbiosis, where LSC is a partner org? I think people should join Symbiosis if they agree with the social ecology, or communalism, or even the construction of a dual power program. Symbiosis is pretty committed to that. The main constructors of dual power in the United States today are Cooperation Jackson, who are part of the Symbiosis member network. So I think if that's what people are really interested in, I think that it's imperative you go join Symbiosis. There's probably a chapter at least somewhere near you, and if not, start one. Chapters start with 2 or 3 people a lot of the time. Yeah, I mean, so that's mostly the answer to that question. I think Symbiosis is a fantastic organization that's got a good future ahead of it, but I think we kind of need to get some people joining it for it to grow. Let's see here. Free Market Anarchist asks, thoughts on market socialism, the libertarian variety like mutualism? Yeah. So I've often I mean, I've been all over the place with my thoughts on market socialism or market anarchism or whatever. And the reason is because I believe that in the interim, we are going to have to interact with the market. What we build in this time where we are constructing dual power requires us to construct both the atom of the, or like the nucleus of this new society, in wherein we will create the idealized economic circumstances, such as, you know, free shop, direct distribution, mutual aid stuff, gift economies, that kind of stuff. That's like the true representation of the future world. We need to create that. But it can't only be that. We're going to have to interact with the economy outside of ourselves. And as we expand and build an autonomous region as best we can, we're going to have to interact with other economies. That will require that we will then also be developing cooperative structures and mechanisms by which to interact with that economy in such a way that it is prefigurative instead of being a point of devolution. Once again, this requires the confederation of these institutions into the democratic council structures, or if you don't like the word democracy, consensus council structures. And I think that's a very important part of it. So, but then what I would say more broadly about market socialism is, what I don't like about market socialism is it often treats the market as a goal. Like we're trying to get to a market. And that's very peculiar. I don't think we're trying to achieve market socialism. I think that market socialism is probably just like going to be mixed in with the process to some degree, but I think that we should be attempting the abolition of the commodity form, right? Like that's what we're aiming for, is direct distribution. So I'm not looking to build create something that will its trajectory will land us within a market system. And I understand there's other people who think otherwise, but I personally am not aiming for a market system. I am willing to create an intermediary interaction with the market system within the prefigurative structures that we produce. But I do not think that we should be, those prefigurative structures should be anticipating that once they have leverage and are expanding, that what they are trying to do is put in place a market system. So Colin B. Oh, okay. Yeah. Excuse me. Kurt Wackett asks, what would counterintelligence look like then? And what sort of skills would one need? How could they be attained? See, I find this to be one of the most challenging topics insofar as we're talking about prefigurative politics. Intelligence is one of those things that only has to exist because other intelligence exists. You don't need spies if other people don't have spies. Counterintelligence is a response to people trying to gather a bunch of intelligence. I've given one model as per how you could produce something that functioned a little more like a traditional intelligence agency that had within it the processes that would prevent it, hopefully, from concentrating too much power. And that is in the video, Constructing the Revolution. That is the fourth pillar. You can find it in the fourth part of the video series, or in the video. So I recommend going to that if you're looking for like one of the answers. It's kind of a loose elaboration of the Kontrrazvedka in the Ukraine. But it should be said, there's also a second component. There's a sort of component of unsecreting things, right? Like that's the component of keeping secrets and preventing secrets from getting out and these sorts of things. And possibly finding out what the enemy's secrets are. That's like kind of the component of that. But then there's another chunk where really what you would like is that everybody knew this certain thing. Like we got like WikiLeaks is a model for that, right? And I call this like unsecreting. Like you want everybody to know X fact. So then we want to also develop the ability to unsecret things, these sort of like drop boxes and trust networks and digital trust networks and stuff. These might be really valuable things for us to explore and try to develop better in order to do this process. Might I add, I do not consider this a solved part of the discussion. And if any of you have brilliant ideas on how you think you might create something that is more prefigurative of anarchist values and is better than what I've got in the fourth pillar of constructing the revolution, I think that would be incredibly valuable. And I would be happy to hear suggestions, and for there to be a better discussion on the topic, for people to take seriously the fact that if this is a systems conflict, we need to take seriously that we are at war, and that requires intelligence and counterintelligence. So I'm not going to go super in deep about like what it would look like and how it would function and what sort of skills one would need and how they could be attained, because the part of that was already answered in the video, and it took as long as it did in the video, several minutes, right? And I think expanding on it would probably take even longer. Where would you get the skills? I mean, I'll kind of vaguely say that if you're interested in the second aspect, or even a little bit of the first aspect, being a software developer or learning about cybersecurity might be good things to do. And these might be good places to start in understanding what needs to be done. And if those are the skills you're trying to attain, you want to be useful in that capacity, intelligence for the movement, might be a good angle for you to proceed in, or to just study a lot of how these intelligence agencies work. What is your opinion on C4SS and LWMAs? I sort of answered that, but I'll kind of go in again. My opinion on C4SS more specifically is I actually like some of the work that they produce. I like that they are more science-minded people. I think that they often have very good insights. I've already expressed my opinions on left-wing market anarchism and my problems with the ideas. I could go into way more depth about why I don't like markets in a general sense, but I don't think that's really necessary here. I think just to make clear that, that's not the goal I'm aiming for. And it seems sometimes that people who call themselves market anarchists are making it into a goal. Very peculiar to me. So, but C4SS in a general sense, they have some good articles with that caveat. What are your thoughts on transhumanism? Also, how would we get the states of the world to dismantle their nuclear weapons? What are my thoughts on transhumanism? I've been meaning to read more into the varieties of humanism, transhumanism, anti-humanism, and post-humanism. I've had longer discussions with anarcho-pill or total abolition, however you may know them, about the topic. And I think transhumanism is not the direction I would go. It's not to say that I have like as strong of opinions, but I think that I am more of a post-humanist. I'm looking for a reintegrated human. I'm not looking to abandon all of what it is to be human, because I think there's something very valuable and probably extremely meaningful in what it is to be human. But I also recognize that humanity is an entity in process, that as a species and as individual beings, they're constantly in the process of development and expanding their boundaries. I think that conscious beings want to be boundless. I think that they find their boundaries, and then because they can think, because they can conceptualize a new mental terrain, are able to also conceive what it would look like for them to expand those means, to expand the boundaries of their personhoods, and to change themselves into things that they would have never thought they could be previously. And thus, this is why I kind of expressed this previous reservation about this group of philosophies that I listed off: Stoicism, pessimism, Buddhism, Taoism. I don't oppose any of them, perhaps besides pessimism, very vocally. But one of the big reasons why I oppose them is because I think that they all, in a way, almost appear to be telling us to accept our boundaries. And I don't think this is natural to us. I think that it is natural to want to extend and expand our personhoods and to expand our ability to both control and interact with the world. And that this isn't something we should be trying to prevent. Yes, it will create suffering. Yes, it will create challenge, but that is part of existence. And we will never be able to avoid that suffering or challenge insofar as that we are beings with the ability to conceive things otherwise than they are. So this is my position, and that position may be taken as transhumanist by some. But I think there are possible real limitations. Those limitations most certainly probably could be overcome by the usage of technology, but I am also afraid of something that might be lost in that process. And I'm also a little afraid of in the flip direction of possible essentialism within transhumanism, within its presumptions. Now, then anarcho-transhumanism may indeed not contain a lot of those problematic elements. But this is my broad coverage of this issue. I haven't read enough into these varieties to give you anything more than that sort of vague hand waving, I suppose. The second one you asked was, how would we get the states of the world to dismantle their nuclear weapons? I don't think we will. I don't think that's going to happen, personally. Insofar as that there is an escalation of weapons, there is an escalation of the desire for leverage. They're not going to give away their leverage. This is one of the, I think, the foolish notions of a liberal approach, is the belief that you're going to get them to stop being power seekers, that you're going to get the parasitic system to stop being parasitic. You're going to get a death-oriented system to stop being death-oriented. It's not within its capacity to do so. And, there may be limited disarmament of nuclear weapons, but I don't think in the future you should expect to see disarmament be the direction we go. I think you're going to see the direction go in increased nuclear armament and more states attempting to find nuclear weapons. And I think that the only answer to how there would be wide-scale nuclear disarmament would be under the conditions that revolution begins, that the processes of dissolving state power begins, that states become weakened, that this doesn't perhaps become their first priority. Therefore, the nuclear stockpiles begin to grow more slowly in some capacity, or just that the state becomes incapable of producing them anymore. They're unable to requisition the necessary funds, or they are being stymied so much by revolt that it's just something they can't worry about. I think this is the only real solution. I think that to many of these problems, we must begin the prefigurative solution, the prefigurative revolution now, because once again, I just want to reiterate, this is a systems conflict, and their system is incredibly embedded, and we need to go to work very eagerly producing the replacement, producing the thing that will go into conflict with it. So that's the answer to that, I suppose. Do you have any thoughts on the rebels in West Papua and their fight against the Indonesian state? I would be completely out of my depth to try to answer a question on that topic. I have heard secondhand things about the events, but if I were to comment on it, I would be lying about my expertise. I need to read more on that topic to have an opinion. Thoughts on North Korea? North Korea is, in many ways, one of the worst outcomes of what state socialism can produce. They have pretty much all the downsides and almost none of the upsides. Their isolationism is, I can see an attempt for them to remain unentangled with the imperial world system. I get that. But autarky is very challenging to endure, and their people are having to endure the outcomes of autarky. I think also they have a very authoritarian, very hierarchical system. The fact that there's something within it which almost appears to be a monarchy is extremely disturbing. And when I look into it, they are just explicitly state capitalist. They do not have any significant worker or social ownership of the means of production. It's just state ownership, really. And there's nothing inspiring to me about that. I mean, the only thing that's inspiring to me about that is that they are resisting the international pressures of imperial world powers. That's good. And I'm glad. I would not want that to change. Just so we're clear, I would never support invasion into North Korea. That is not okay. And I would never justify such a thing. I would instead say what I would like to see in North Korea is for the people of North Korea to rediscover the struggle for autonomy and collective control of their society, and to recognize that the struggle is not ended, and that they have not achieved the goals that their grandfathers spilled their blood to achieve. Or they're not grandfathers, but you know what I'm saying. I think that in many of these places, the aesthetics of socialism, the aesthetics of a dead revolution are intense placating factors for the peoples of those nations, such that they come to think that they are carrying on a revolution instead of living within a society that was birthed on the death of their revolution, still appropriating its symbols. To me, that's very disturbing. Someplace like DPRK is in many ways the worst manifestation of that. And this is not my position only just from a partisan perspective. Like, you heard me say that there were some good things about Cuba, and there are actually some good things about Vietnam and as even China. But DPRK, it's not to say like it's just a hellhole. Like it's just a place where people live, right? But it is not in any way a good example for us as a revolution, as people attempting to carry out revolution. It seems in many ways the representation of they're almost like the leftovers of a previous praxis, which was never able to carry itself out to its fullest extent. Almost like they're living in a dead dream. It's very sad. So let's see here. Do you think that veganism would play a pivotal part under a possible anarchist revolution? I think that I have complex opinions about veganism, and it's not actually from this perspective where I'm like disagreeing with them about the unethicality of meat production, the way that animals are treated, all of that. Obviously, it's horrific. Absolutely revolting. It's disgusting. There's a reason why people don't want to watch the videos that come from those factory farms and slaughterhouses, and it's because they're awful. They're offensive to people's humanity when they watch them. And with that in mind, there's no denial of the fact that this industry is horrifically exploitative, that it is very damaging to the earth. My question for most people who consider themselves vegan is, what is actually being done to solve that problem? To what degree are people really taking place in a consumer boycott when they should be doing direct action? Because boycotts have limited effectiveness. Boycotts are good when you have, say, a mass movement that is around them in order to explicate the demands of the movement. And veganism has a relatively large movement. But the problem is that what we see is these industries are not going away. We see other societies where they have a much more vegan diet, or rather a much more vegetarian diet in a general sense. We don't see those industries being eliminated. The amount of suffering has been reduced, certainly, and it's possible that this boycott could reduce the suffering of animals to an extensive degree, but I do not believe that it has the capacity to eliminate those exploitative industrial farming systems and means of exploitation and means of ecological devastation. I don't think that boycott can do that. And I think a lot of people are riding their entire veganistic praxis upon this boycott. But this boycott is supposed to do everything. It's and the very act of eating meat is like you killing the cow, and it comes to be highly symbolic. And what I would advocate to people who are committed to that struggle, who are truly committed enough that they've already changed their own personal lifestyles in that way, is to commit to direct action, to actually do the work to dismantle those systems. And I have a lot of respect for ALF, for example, for that very reason. And I'm, that's not personally what I am involving myself in, because it's not the struggle that we are focusing on where in my locality. But it is highly valuable to do direct action in any of these things. And I would like to see more vegans be radical in this way, so that there might actually be some process by which that there can be an undermining of these systems as they stand, instead of what is essentially a very big boycott. So then answering the question more broadly, is veganism going to play a pivotal part under a possible anarchist revolution? In the capacity that I just discussed, yes, because every hierarchy needs to be countervailed. The hierarchy of humans over animals is quite disgusting. The exploitation of humans and of animals by humans is terrible, and it creates the foundations for a bunch of the other forms of oppression. It creates the ideological scaffolding for things like ableism and white supremacy and even patriarchy. The comparison of these lower peoples to animals, the destruction of the right of these animals to live full, happy, healthy lives, and the acceptance that they are like nothing more than a rock, and that they don't have any value. There's no ethical value to what you do to them, that it doesn't matter, their suffering doesn't matter. This becomes the mental scaffolding for the justification for many of these other very exploitative hierarchies. So I'm a meat eater who says all of this. I think if you're a meat eater, you should think about these things, and that you should take seriously what the discussions that are taking place in vegan spaces. And I think that you should avoid your knee-jerk reaction to try to defend the fact that you eat meat, other than to say that I don't think eating meat is what leads to these systems of exploitation. Yeah. So anyway, that's another discussion we could have much more in depth, and I've had it with numerous people. I think it's a very interesting discussion and has a lot of moral weight to it. I just said, oh no, I said ethics and morals in one answer. Oh no, everybody's going to get so angry about it. Give me just a second. It's been an hour and a half. I'm going to take a quick break, and I'll be back in just a minute or two. All right. Okay. We'll just pick up right where we were at. Will this live stream be posted later? Yes. Yeah. Probably answered that way too late for you, considering you were saying that you were about to leave. For anybody else asking that, the answer is yes. I will. This will still be up afterwards. Advice on getting through denser theory. A lot of the more academic speech goes over my head. There are a variety of approaches to this. Many different people approach it in many different ways. One approach that many people take is to just go super slow. I mean, it's very unsatisfying, but like go very slow. You know, most of us are able to kind of read from instinct to a degree. You can kind of put things together by instinct, just being like, oh, this sounds like what they're getting at is the tone of this sentence is blah, blah, blah. But there's also just going to be times you're just like, I don't even know what that word means. In that occasion, I would just tell you to go look up the word. I know that sounds really like basic, but really take your time and try to understand every sentence. Anarcho-Pack, or I apologize, Zoe Baker, has said before that this is their approach. They go very slow. They try their best to really understand every sentence before they move on. Me, I'm mostly of this sort where I am just trying to get the overall thesis of the ideas. I know that I'm not going to remember every single tiny detail, so I'm really looking for the most important statements, the ones that are pivotal, where everything seems to revolve around it, and those are the ones that I really try to understand well. And of course, there's lots of connective ideas that need to be understood. But I'm one of these where I kind of, a lot of the time, I'm just kind of trying to get good, loose overview so that I at least feel as if I have a good idea of the basic arguments they're trying to make, and trying to get a feel for the positions that they hold so that I can either, implement the arguments that they're making, the ideas that they're expressing, figure out where I do or do not agree with them on certain topics. But I don't feel as if I need to be a scholar of every single person I read. I just want to understand it well enough to understand their ideas, maybe further than a broad level, like a 102 or 103 level, you might say. But I don't need to like write a thesis on them every single time. And then, okay, so that's like way number two. Lots of people do that too. And I would say another way is to do a reading group. And I actually think that this is one of the best ways. Get together with 2-3 people and have them all really commit to reading this particular theory that you're interested in and work through it together. One chapter at a time, 10 pages at a time, whatever it takes. I actually have found that it's really enjoyable to read together, to read out loud and to discuss things together as we go through it. That's slower, but it's often excellent for conversation. You can learn so much from that. So there's lots of approaches. Another approach is to start reading, go read reliable summaries of those works. Go to, if it's philosophy, go to plato.stanford.edu or whatever. Go to, essentially places that are good repositories, condensations of the knowledge. There shouldn't be any shame in consuming secondary literature if it's necessary. Most people consume secondary literature. That's totally normal and fine. You just have to keep in mind what the views of the person who's doing the secondary literature is. So the answer to your question is there's a lot of approaches, and finding somebody who acts as an educator can often be very important. So let's see here. Where are we at? Sam asked, have you seen the Teamsters national vote to take on Amazon directly or nationally? I saw it in my feed, but I didn't really read a whole lot into it, but seemed like a good thing to read. I'm glad to hear it. Have you thought about posting clips on TikTok? I've not, but honestly, maybe I should. It's not like, it's not against my ethos. It's not against my content producer's ethos. I'd be willing to do that. I've never really thought about it in depth, but it actually might be a good way to get the ideas out there, to drive some traffic to the channel. I just don't know if I personally have the wherewithal to do it, but possibly. Find out. Let's see here. Captain Gwendolyn asks, do you think that social democracy, either by necessity or because of the limits of what people are open to in the US, will become a predecessor to more anarchist forms of change like market socialism? So I kind of expressed my feelings on market socialism, I think, twice at this point. So I'll probably decline on answering that portion. And I think that social democracy, I'll say there's kind of two things I want to say about it. Thing number one, what we just saw, this big Bernie surge and all of that, and the surge of radicalism that accompanied it, also large degree of social democracy accompanying it, was good. That was good. I'm not going to pretend like that wasn't good. It was the outcome of processes that preceded Bernie, which is, say, going back to Occupy, and before that going to the anti-globalization movement and going back and back. But it was good overall. That megaphone was valuable. The problem is people kind of got the wrong idea. They got the idea that oh, we almost got Bernie in. Now that means we just got this on lock. We can just go do a bunch of electoral politics and we just need to build up the coalition. Well, the problem is that Bernies are rare. Okay, Bernies are very rare. The man was there for decades. And even then, had some questionable votes, was on the wrong side of a few issues, and himself didn't end up being sufficient to get the job done. And what we have now are a bunch of people, which I'm not disparaging the people themselves, but they are not going to be anywhere near as Bernie. Okay, they're going to be people that are starting from scratch. They're starting from the beginning, and they have to demonstrate a record. And a lot of them are going to betray people. Okay. I would say we should not be trying to use electoral politics. I do not think that electoral politics are involved in the success of what we are doing. But that brings me to thing number two. Even if you do believe that, you should not be focusing on electoral politics, because that's not how it works. You have to do the social movement first. Remember how I said Bernie is the result of Occupy Wall Street and the anti-globalization movement and all of that, okay? Without those, you wouldn't have had a Bernie. Bernie never would have caught on. You need the movement. The movement is what builds everything. The people, elections, people being made representatives and all that. That's not what that's the outcome of these things. Okay. That's the outcome of having a mass movement. So indeed, what needs to be done is the construction of a dual power that can scare the system into being willing to let these SOCDEMs into power. If you want SOCDEMs in power, help us build dual power, and they'll be so afraid of it, they'll let your SOCDEMs into power. And I'll go further. Is it necessary because of the limits of what people are open to? I do not believe that. I do not take the stance that we have to go where people are at, and that's it. Oh, people have this mindset. We gotta be that mind. That's it. Right? Like we have to live within the mindset that they already have, and we have to capitulate to their ways of thinking. I disagree. I think we have to take a radical approach to trying to move them out of these silos of thought as they stand, and we need to be trying to move them towards more radical ways of looking at the world. And I have seen people go down extreme paths of radicalization. I would say most people who are radicals they were radicalized, right? It's not like they were a little baby and they were anarchists right off the bat. People can change. They can change their perspectives, even older people. I have personally radicalized a friend of mine who is older. He's considerably older than any of my other friends. And the man's in like his 50s, and yet I have pushed like brought him through this process of radicalization over many conversations that we've had. So it is doable, and we need to conceive the manner by which it will be done. And I don't think that we have to only work within their paradigm. I think that it's in fact quite useful to shock them just outside of that paradigm in order to get them to expand their boundaries out a little bit further. And then you shock them outside that paradigm a little bit more each time, pushing a little closer to a radical perspective. So that's my answer to that question. Anarchist Federation asked, wasn't Malatesta once shot at a meeting? He didn't go to the cops, and a while later he was asked if he's angry at the other anarchists, and he was like, it's okay, I'm sure he regrets it. Yes, that's what I've read. I've read that's exactly what happened. Malatesta was legendary. Truly. I don't know. There's very few people, I think, who can live up to that kind of legacy of his personhood, his personal character, his actions abroad, his organizational prowess, his theoretical depth. What an incredible human being he was. Wow. Let's see here. Okay, I'm still trying to. Oh God, I'm getting pretty far behind. Oh God, I'm getting so far behind. Oh God. Okay, I'm getting there. Are you doing any tenants' rights work in Tulsa? Cooperation Tulsa is. I am personally not very involved in it. I know what's going on, but I personally have had very little hand in the tenant organizing. But Cooperation Tulsa is actively involved in tenant organizing. Yes. Now, are you a supporter of anarcho prisons? Oh yeah, I mean that's what Twitter tells me. I'm a supporter of anarcho prisons, apparently. But I would say no. I don't think what I've advocated is a prison, and I think that insofar as we call it a prison, we're kind of losing the meaning of what we say when we're asking to abolish prisons. You can go look at After the Revolution. In that video, I advocate a model. Like the other models I present, I'm not going to say it's absolutely perfect, but I don't think that it should be portrayed as anarcho prisons. No, I don't. Let's see here. Colin B, you're commenting on numerous of these that are on that list. Why would you consider those two autonomies when it seems they have large anarchist presence? A lot of these were numerous of us coming together and building this list. I've forgotten some of the details of some of these. I'd like to go and delve back in again, but yeah, I mean, if some of these are categorized wrong, I would put them in the correct categories. Anarcho pill, of course, you're just coming in here with one that's supposed to explode everything. Thoughts on the state of the online left? Wow, you're really living up to your reputation as a shit stirrer with that one. It's almost like too big of a question to possibly be able to address in any succinct statement. I think that there is there is an actual praxis to things that are done online. They have value in some ways. They can be useful in radicalizing people. They can be useful in giving people resources. They can be useful in a variety of ways, distributing things that people need and so on. But I do think there's also sometimes where people use these disputes on the internet and the discussions on the internet as a sort of surrogate for doing things that actually have an impact. That because they have had these arguments and they feel they have victored in the debate on Twitter or whatever, that they do not feel as if they have the necessity to act. It gives them the satisfaction of having succeeded upon the topic. And that sometimes stands in for real concerted action. I also think that people have a tendency to get overly vicious about things which could easily be discussed in a civil manner. And it should be said, in the opposite direction, people get very offended by extremely dry statements. People get very angry at what are very rational responses, you know, that people will have, like just completely normal arguments to make to a given idea, yet they respond like you have deeply insulted them, like, and then they just fly off the handle. What is my thoughts on the state of the online left? Where do I start? You see what I'm saying? Like, there's just too much to say about it. I think that I may eventually do a video trying to get all my thoughts together on how the internet has affected praxis and has affected radicalization and all of these things, and what its value is, and understanding where it really stands as a piece in the process of expanding hierarchical, anti-hierarchical consciousness and so on. But it's a clusterfuck. That's the truth. I mean, it's all over the place, and people get, like I said, I think the biggest problem is really just there's so much viciousness among people who are like 5 steps away from each other. But then there's also a weird desire to get along with people who hate you. There's nothing that's going to sum it all up. So let's see here. Post comprehension, aka being, asks, "What do you think about being?" It's funny you've asked that in numerous places in the previous times. I was like, didn't want to say anything because I hadn't watched any of your work, and I watched some today, and the production quality is very, very high. The aesthetics are very nice. You're well researched. You've got pretty good content. I like it. I'll watch more of it, and you can ask that question again, and I'll give you a deeper insight. But yeah, I from what I've seen, I approve. Daniel expands on his previous question. The reason why I asked the nuclear weapon question is because I'm afraid that states will use them in a revolution. How would, in a revolution, we avoid that? I don't think that's the case. I do not think that these nations are going to nuke themselves. Nuclear weapons are very, very, very dangerous, even away from the areas they are being used. I think that the likelihood of a nation nuking itself, very, very low likelihood, unless that nation is in its death throes or something. Like, we're talking about a state that is almost going to die, and this is its last. And I doubt it. I doubt it. It's to destroy its own base of power. The nation derives its power from the resources and labor of the nation, the complicity of the people within it. To destroy enormous swaths of the people within your society is to undermine your real material power across the planet. So I would be willing to say that they may never drop a nuke on their own citizens. Even the size of the nukes we've got now, it's really pretty dangerous to drop a nuke anywhere on the planet. You're gonna feel the effects. So I'm very doubtful that that's the outcome of what will take place. I think people sometimes have this idea that the state is more effective than it actually is, and I don't think that there's any way that a state could effectively use a nuclear weapon on itself and not do devastating damage to its own ability to maintain power in the near future. I think it would also backfire in a terrible way in the nation, probably driving many people who were advocates of the state to reject the state in that, and it may actually work against them in that capacity. So, yeah, but we're dealing with a hypothetical, right? Let's see here. Nice. Okay, we got people arguing. This is always good to see. This is a sign of everything going well. But let's see. Okay. Okay, it's not that bad. Oh God. Okay, we're getting there. Oh. Oh God. Okay, I've finally caught up to where apparently I left the chat because then everybody's talking about chair. They're saying that I pooped. Wow, this is very good commentary here. What is happening? What is happening? Okay. So here we go. Here's a question. Suleth View, I'm going to assume is how it says. Suleth View. I don't know. Hey, I absolutely love your videos. My question is, how do you manage to get someone to consider anarchism or anti-capitalism without them thinking you're insane or utopian? It's really hard for me. My answer is to first uncover for them the absurdity of the system we're under. I think that's a big part of it. First, they need to understand the system they are currently under. And I think that also a very valuable aspect of this is comparing this system to previous systems and kind of explaining how things have and have not changed, helping them understand that in many ways we still the oppressive things that they hate about feudalism, many of them are still quite present in our lives in ways that maybe they haven't understood, but also explaining the many ways that we aren't quite like feudalism, that we have changed in very radical ways. This contrast can be good to help them understand things don't just stay the same indefinitely. It's essentially a way of trying to defeat the end of history mentality, because I think that's really a big part of what plays to their belief that, you know, any options to the contrary are utopian. I think it's also important when explaining anarchism not to explain anarchism. Don't explain anarchy. Explain anarchism. Okay, if you talk to them about anarchy, they're going to think you're like utopian, like you say. But like, it's a goal. It's a far off goal, right? It's something we're moving towards. It's not something we're like, cool, all we got to do is just get together and everybody's going to do an anarchy right now. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some thought that kind of is in that direction when you go really far back. But I would say it's really about trying to help them understand the absurdities of the society as it stands, the history of where these absurdities come from, and understanding what the process to actual true transformation looks like, and helping them understand its rational components, like why it actually makes sense that this is not ridiculous. This is an actual method towards change. So that's, of course, very challenging. It requires a decent coverage of the material. It also requires really knocking down a lot of misconceptions. That's a big part of it, honestly. Do you feel like within our lifetime there will be an anarchist revolution or just a proletarian one? I think that there can only be an anarchist revolution insofar as that we're talking about successful revolutions. But I don't mean that in the sense that like they're waving black flags and call themselves anarchists. I mean to say that the means by which anarchists critique the alternatives are true, period. And that the mechanisms by which we will need to do it, which is to say, understanding means ends unity, is necessary. And therefore, if those principles are followed out through somewhere throughout the planet, that will be the only mechanism which can do the work, in my opinion. So I don't think that it has to be called anarchist to be possibly successful, but I think that they'll end up agreeing with the anarchists. Which one is successful will end up being one that has a lot of agreement with the historical contentions of anarchists. Let's see here. Okay. Oh, almost caught up. Getting there. Okay, I'm catching up. I'm almost here. Okay, the Derek asks, how would you overcome the general apathy towards politics that many people feel? For example, completely shutting down political discussions out of boredom or being apolitical. Of course, this is just a challenge in a general sense. I don't think that it's necessary for us to be able to give an answer that is like a foolproof answer to this one. I think this one's very challenging, and I think apathy and apoliticism are pernicious dangers within society, and they lead to the expansion of systems of hierarchy and exploitation. The only thing that's really ever worked for me, two things has only ever worked in my experience. I mean, there's probably 100 other answers, but for me, it is number one, helping them understand the manner in which all of this actually matters, like that it actually is inexorably tied to their life and the outcome of their needs and their values. And if they ignore it, they will only be further exploited. They will only be more miserable. And the only solution to the misery that they're experiencing that they could possibly get is to finally act upon a truly transformative program, which might indeed eliminate the things which bring them misery. That's very challenging to convey to people, especially for people who've already accepted that they're being tuned out is totally acceptable, and that it's fine. You're essentially just literally convincing them of the contrary, that it does matter, that their engagement is the only thing that can do the necessary process of transformation. That's thing number one. Thing number two is to just undergo things which expose you too directly to the incompetencies, the corruption, the damage, the extraction of the systems as they stand. To experience being exploited, to experience being used like a tool. Also, for some people, going to protests, that's one of the values of a protest, insofar as it does have value, is that it can lead people to come into conflict with police for the first time, and to experience what it's like to be in a crowd that has that amount of power, to recognize what it feels like to have power along with the masses of people, to recognize that there's nothing they could do if you guys just chose to carry out whatever your action was. That can be very radicalizing, especially being in radical protests. So radical protests are going to teach you a radical method of action many times, and they're also going to expose you to police response to radical actions, and it's going to make you ask questions. Often will make people ask questions. What is the role of the state in my life? Why is it that police are beating people over the thing that we're out here for? Quite often, you'll be out there for something good, and yet the police are beating the shit out of people and hurting people. That can be very radicalizing for people. So, put another way, being actively harmed by these systems and recognizing that you are being harmed by them is often a way to snap somebody out of the delusion of this sort of centrist or apolitical viewpoint that you discuss here. And if they give in, if they go doomer, have them read Camus, I guess. I don't know. I wrote Hope, hoping to bail people out of this. So if you're interested, go watch the latest video I produced called Hope, and maybe it'll give you something. And maybe it'll give you a few arguments that might stick in your mind and might be useful for you later. Somebody said more likely to use the threat of them as leverage. No, yeah, talking about nuclear weapons, I would agree with that. And I think insofar as that they can scare people, they could be very valuable. Oh, Sulith. I'm going to Sulith. I was more asking, saying about if you think a proper revolution against the system will happen in the first place. I don't make predictions like that. I think it's a bad idea to make predictions like that. I only know what must be done. I'm not going to tell you that we will absolutely succeed. I'm not going to tell you that the revolution will happen. I'm not going to tell you that, everybody will come together and do what is necessary. I'm only telling you what must be done for us to escape a system of subjugation and misery. And I believe that if people can be made to recognize these facts en masse, and they can be drawn towards an actual effective program of action, and they can be pointed toward an actual examples that are carrying out the practices at hand, I think that you will see that there can be enormous groundswell for very radical ideas very fast. It is our job to create a fertile soil for those radical ideas to grow within, to rip up the weeds of hierarchical ideology, to destroy the concept of hierarchical realism, such that they don't believe they need to recapitulate to the very structures of domination which stood over them beforehand. So, yeah, that's what I'll say. Once again, and I would recommend hope. Once again, this video may be pertinent to you with that question. Daniel addressed the individualist versus social anarchist divide at Chaz. I won't say anything about the specifics of the actual separation between the individualists and social anarchists at Chaz, because I'm actually not aware of what the specifics are. But what I will say is that I think Chaz needed to be democratized almost right off the bat. The fact that everything was run in a very disorganized fashion was not good. It decreased accountability. It led to apparently a small militia group being able to shoot a child, and they were not able to be held to accountability because of the disorganized structure of everything as it stood. It is imperative that if we are undergoing a systems conflict, that we begin putting the system we wish to see into place as soon as we have seized any sort of autonomy. And it seems to me that this was carried out without an awareness of the organizational needs of such a project as it stood. I would really like to have seen a recurring council created where people were invited to attend, or I should say a public assembly model or a people's assembly model created very early on. That to me was absolutely necessary, and I think the lack of that was what led to some of the worst parts and what led to some of its biggest dissolution. Anarcho-Pill asks a much less controversial question this time, or a much less challenging one, perhaps. Given that the Olympics are wrapping up, is there any revolutionary or subversive potential in sports, or will they continue to serve as tools of nationalism, patriarchy, etc.? I couldn't tell you. I won't make predictions of that sort, but what I will say is that they don't have to be. They don't have to be tools of nationalism and patriarchy and so on. I think that sports could be made liberatory, but I do think that the role that sports fill in our societies a lot of the time it has several purposes. One of them being as sort of distraction. They're the circuses, inbred in circuses for a lot of people. They're the entertainment that a lot of people seek out, and there's a sort of a violent aspect, which is very entertaining for people. And I think that was even more so before the rise of modern television. And they are also tools to establish nationalistic pride, absolutely, especially a status nationalism. And that's no less true at some place like the Olympics. That being said, I don't think that within their inherent nature that they are that this is what they must be. I think that sports are just games, right? They're just games played with a physical exertion with some degree of athleticism involved. And with that in mind, I don't think that games are also that naturally meant to be nationalistic or patriarchal. They can, in the similar way, have these strains throughout them. But I don't think they have to be that. I think they can be made into something better. I think they can be made into a way perhaps to teach people communal values, cooperation, and so on. But at the moment, they very well serve the purposes of keeping people placated in a very, very exploitative society. What are your thoughts on creative world building as a method of introducing the concepts of radical change with folks? I'm trying my best to incorporate anti-authoritarian themes within my works. I think it's excellent. I think it's a great idea. I think that if you do tabletop, I'll just kind of shortly talk about it. I did a tabletop campaign where the characters were essentially, what I did is I put them under the pressures. I started them at the worst of the worst place in the mythos that I built. It's slums in swamplands where criminal overlords essentially control most of the place. And essentially what I was attempting to do is create a radical consciousness within them. I wanted to see how they responded to this. I knew that there was two ways that campaign could go. They could either join in with the criminals and the crime bosses and all of that, or they could revolt or leave somehow. And they chose to start to revolt. And this is interesting because my friends are like, they have like very anti-authoritarian sort of default stances, but at the time I would say that they were not thoroughly radicalized, right? But throughout this campaign, they essentially underwent a revolution. They had to figure out the means to do a revolution because they decided they wanted to overthrow the kingship essentially. And in order to do this, the players had to ask themselves all the hard questions about how a revolution is actually fought and how indeed you create revolutionary consciousness. How do you carry out what are the kind of sacrifices you're going to have to make? What does the broader scale of a conflict like that look like? And in forcing themselves to ask that question, I was constantly confronting them with parallels. What I would do is they would try to be converting lots of characters, and I would essentially voice the skepticisms that they sound like in our era, but in the feudal era, because they're in a fantasy mythos. So it's essentially people doing the same kind of apologia, the same sorts of arguments they make in the modern day, but they're doing them for a feudal dictator, essentially. And I could see that this was a very radicalizing process for a lot of players because they experienced the frustration that somebody who is a radical today experiences speaking with these people. And they realized, I think they started through this process of recognizing that they may often be on the wrong side of these very sorts of conversations, and recognizing they want to identify with the revolutionaries, not with these people who are trying to fight against a revolution, who are trying to depose a dictator. They came to recognize whose side they really wanted to be on in this process. So I think that maybe making a revolutionary campaign, could be an excellent opportunity for radicalizing people that you're friends with. Can small independent producers, the petty bourgeois, exist in anarcho-communist society? I don't think that the word petty bourgeois would really even have a lot of meaning in an anarchist society, in an anarcho-communist society. There wouldn't even be petty bourgeois anymore, because the petty bourgeois are defined by having their position within the capitalist system. There won't even be commodity production if we're talking about anarcho-communism. And I don't think it would be, not to dog on you here, but I just don't think it would be appropriate to call small independent producers the petty bourgeois if we've established anarcho-communism. But that being said, small independent producers, I think, yes, 100%. The fact is that once you have fully, when you've horizontalized power to an extensive degree, you're in a position where lots of people are going to be able to become small independent producers. We have to imagine that it's like there's still going to be this guy who wants to make really crazy jellies, right? Like who just wants to make really good peach jelly. That guy loves peach jelly. It's his thing. He makes peach jelly. He loves that. He grows the peaches and then he makes peach jelly and he gives it to people and people love it. And, there is very likely to be this sort of person is going to be making this sort of unique thing that people might want. It's quite possible he might expand the capacities to do this. And there's also some possibility that he just wants to make like this boutique thing to give to people, to distribute, because he knows there's value in it. And that's what brings him, satisfaction as a producer. And so if all we mean is a small scale production, of course, small scale production not only should exist, but is pretty well guaranteed to exist. There's no way you're ever going to get away from all small scale production. If we had replicators creating everything, people would replicate things and then put the pieces together to make other things. They wouldn't have the replicator do everything, because people like novelty. They like the recombination of pieces to make new things that they've never seen before. That's never going to go away. That will require some capacities for small scale production to continue. Last question before I go to sleep. Is it true that C&T FAI had labor camps? What do you think about those? Yes, it appears that there were labor camps under the C&T FAI. They really only became prolific, to my knowledge, towards the very end, like as during the period where the state was beginning to subsume the militias and decollectivize large swaths of land. This is when my impression is that they started to create more labor camps. I do not know necessarily what the trajectory of these labor camps were, but having read about them, they're not gulags. That's all I'm going to say. People there were treated pretty well overall. Labor was a necessity, and I don't advocate what they did. I don't think that, that is, I don't think that is necessarily just defensible because they did it, but it's also easy to falsely equivocate these camps with the more intense or like death camps or the gulags or something. They're really not upon that scale, and they really only got bad during the time when the Republic began to subsume the lands that the C&T FAI was managing. So yeah, I won't excuse them. It seems like they did exist. They were largely the process of the C&T FAI becoming entangled with the state. But my impression is that they did exist outside of that, that they were more humane than most labor camps, but that they were labor camps. That's not good. So let's see here. Okay, in working on a pamphlet on anarchistic urban planning in a prefigurative and post-revolutionary sense, I found a Bakunin quote: "Anyone who makes plans for after the revolution is a reactionary." Thoughts? All right. Okay. Well, I think I've had a lot of thoughts about why this position that we're not allowed to think at all about trying to create structures for what takes place after the revolution. I think a large part of it was because people during this era were very well convinced that the processes for the transformation of society into the next one are currently at play. I am merely prognosticating what it appears these movements shall eventually want to become. And they say, we should trust to the movements themselves to churn out the expansion of the productive forces, and that's the Marxist line. And to undergo destruction of hierarchy as it stands. And I really don't. I don't think that this is a. I think that this seemed like a really rational, scientific way to be looking at what was taking place at the time, because they had really big labor movements that were large trade unions. They're very powerful, and it seemed quite obvious that a new world was right upon the horizon. Now we have seen that is not what was happening. Insofar as that there was not a new world right upon the horizon. What took place was the recreation of a lot of these systems of domination. And I think in my opinion, this leaves us in a very different perspective now. We try to repeat the exact same things as the people who are amidst a vast labor movement, which was exploding around them and apparently creating a new world. And I think that they failed to understand that what was actually spurring a lot of these people to action was the desire to create a new world, and they had a new world that they wanted to create in mind. The social ownership of the means of production, I think, was a driving force among many of these revolutions, and the attempt to actually achieve this social ownership of the means of production, I think, was the positive program that many of these revolutionaries fought for. So I think this idea that I think it was easy for them to say that when they had a burgeoning, massive movement around them. But I think that they were only able to say that because the work of setting out this greater vision of a future world had already been done, and had already inspired people to action. And they mistaked just simple labor agitation as the communism in the making, when in fact the labor organizing had to be infused with the desires and the goals of a communist movement in order to achieve even the things that it did. And I think what we really lack in this modern day, and I think the weakness of this sort of mechanistic way of looking things, is just thinking, we don't need to do the work of increasing class consciousness or giving people a positive program. Simply, they'll just come to the state of agitation on their own and bring about the new world organically. And it's like that's like partially true. Like, once you've got your critical mass, that's kind of true. But our stage in the revolution is not the 19 teens. Our stage in the revolution is like the 1870s. And I feel like people are using the rhetoric from the late 1800s and early 1900s when we should be thinking about what was the rhetoric that got the ball rolling to begin with. It was not this rhetoric where people just go, look around you, everything's already going on the right track, because it wasn't. Things weren't going on the right track at that stage. They had to tell them, what is it you want to fight for? Why do you deserve dignity? What is the actual world that might be upon the horizon that you could bring into existence with your action? That if you take these things you are already doing and you focus them towards the proper goal at hand, what you might actually achieve. And I think that hope is what creates revolutions. So I think Bakunin and Marx and all these other guys who are like, we don't tell you about a utopia, we tell you merely what is being created among us, are like taking for granted that just like, oh, the churning forces are, the dialectics are churning, it's all going to happen. And it's like, no, it takes concerted action and effort. It takes actual, catalyst groups working among the people and becoming integrated and doing social insertion and building structures which actually mimic the future world, which is what the unions were for those people, like giving them something to fight for. You are not going to fight a revolution for the dialectics are churning without a knowledge of what you're hoping to achieve. So I think this is what drove them to have these sorts of thoughts. I'd like to expand upon it later, but that's kind of my thoughts on it at the moment. David asks, is anarchism fair? I mean, it attempts to be. It's attempting to establish a system which is fair. It's trying to create a system where everybody is understood as having their own individual abilities, and yet they are part of a bigger society where their abilities are made stronger, and where they are also needed by everyone else. And we're trying to create a society where we can all decide together what needs to be done in the future. And that is the goal of anarchism, is creating a society where we together determine a collective future, and that at the same time, we are by ourselves given the right to live our lives in a way which is good for us individually and personally. So it's trying to balance fairness for everyone and fairness for the individual. It's trying to find the balance between those. Tim Wolf says, do you think social democracy would pacify the working classes and make them less likely to engage with the revolutionary ideals, as they would see the state providing for them? I don't take exactly that stance. I think it can have that effect to some degree. But also, I've kind of made clear earlier in the stream that I don't really think that social democracy really gets started as a force in and of itself. I think it's the result of having large movements that are already very active and have already got people radicalized into very different ways of thinking, such that they are willing to vote for these social democrats who are proposing that things be reorganized in this way. So I don't know if it necessarily works that way. I do think that if they get a ton of concessions, it can lead to people like emptying out all their energy and electoral efforts and feeling as if the process is done when they've achieved this specific gain. I see this as a system basically being forced to return to an incentive cycle as opposed to just a disincentive cycle. A disincentive cycle is one where it's all punishment to get what you want: fear, punishment, negative emotions as the outcome for doing things the system doesn't like. Our system, I would say all systems of hierarchical power systems want to do this. This is what they want, is only a disincentive cycle. It allows them to attain obedience without a whole lot of active effort. Whereas an incentive cycle can also get obedience, but God, they have to give up so much. They can't just hoard it all to themselves. The power structure can't concentrate everything. It's got to distribute a little bit at least. And so the systems don't want to do incentive cycles. They want to do disincentive cycles. And that's why we see them go towards more and more towards these disincentive cycles. So what it seems to me is a social democratic movement is often one where what you've done is forced the system to reintroduce an incentive cycle. You go, listen, man, you cannot just keep stepping on our neck all the time. You got to at least like give me some bread while you step on my neck or something. And they go, here you go, here's some bread. And they essentially go, okay, how much bread do I have to give you before you stop complaining about my foot being on your neck? Before we come to an agreement that the foot on my neck is worth the bread I gave you. And if they do that effectively, they can kill a social movement. I think that's largely what was taking place in the New Deal era with FDR and all of that. I don't know if it was conscious in that way. I think maybe it was, honestly, given some quotes that I've heard. But that was the effect. That was the effect. They kicked back in the incentive cycle enough so that people were willing to can let the foot can stay on their neck. Now, what I think is right now we're experiencing the system has such hubris that it won't even do that. Especially in the United States, for example. I think that they are just refusing to give us any of that incentive cycle back. They are seeing if they can be as stubborn as conceivably possible and convince us to give us no bread and to keep the foot on our neck. That's what they're really trying to see if they can do. They don't want to give us anything more. They only want to go the other direction. They're done giving us pensions and minimum wage increases and things like this. So it can very well placate if they carry it out correctly. If they carry out in small amounts, it does not placate. It actually spurs people to action. They're like, whoa, I forced the state to give me X by rioting. I'm going to keep rioting. But if it turns out that the state gives them everything, it starts giving them a ton of what they want, then I think that it can have a placating effect. Yes. He says, okay, that's great. I want anarchy. Nice. Okay. Let's see. Where are we at? Dang, I thought I was about to catch up. Oh my gosh, still not caught up. Okay. Do you plan to make any videos on economic planning? What are your thoughts on libertarian socialist planning proposals like Paracon? Actually, I do think I'm going to create a video on economics. Yes, I think it will mention Paracon and capital as power. I don't know how much it will focus around planning itself, but it will definitely be a video considering economics, really just orienting itself around economics and economic politics and all of these things, and relating it to the anarchist theory of hierarchies and recognizing how they operate here. There'll be a little bit of economic stuff in the video I'm currently writing, the first part of the anarchist one, and probably a little bit in the second and third as well. But I do not yet have a video planned for explicitly just talking about economics and planning. But I probably will eventually do so. Where could we practice a more communal family model in the present day? It's not like I can approach my neighbors right now and take their kids for the day. That one's really challenging. I got to say, I have not spent enough time reading youth liberation literature and non-conventional or unconventional family styles to really feel like I have a good grasp of what the praxis would look like on that. It seems to me like my vague sort of approach to it is basically just to say, form families yourself that don't have that structure when you have children and so on. But I'll admit my ignorance for the most part on that. I think there's probably way better answers than I could provide. Let's see here. Anarcho Pill back again. Have you ever considered making a documentary about the political movements you're involved with in Tulsa? I'm really not the sort of person to make a documentary like that. Actually, one of the members in my group is more likely. His name is Roberto. He definitely has more of that sort of background in film and things like that. So I think that might be more something he would be interested in. Personally, I don't think it would be the right direction for my channel, but I think there is all kinds of stuff that people don't even know about that just disappears into the ether because it never gets recorded. But should it be made? Yes, absolutely. Piper Bakunin didn't say that. God damn it. All right. Well, I got tricked. But lots of old socialists said stuff almost like that. Oh, a video about my radicalization process. Yeah, I think I'd be willing to make that. Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah, as Anarchist Federation says, longer chains, softer whips, enough bread to shut me up. Exactly. That's what can indeed take place if they really pour on the incentives again. Do you agree with Stalin on social democracy being the moderate wing of fascism? No, that doesn't really seem like a good characterization to me. I've never really been persuaded by any of those arguments. It just kind of seems like a polemical way of trying to paint social democrats as just being complicit with the rise of fascism because they're maintaining capitalism. I do not think that's a fair way of characterizing social democrats as moderate fascists. And any sort of political or structural analysis which would lead you to believe that would most possibly be like, or more probably be like, an anarchist analysis. So yeah, no, I do not think that's a good way to portray them. Even given the things that I've just said, I've given quite a few critiques of social democracy here. Given how long feudalism lasted, do you think capitalism is less resilient than feudalism and will fall much sooner? No, but I also just I can't tell you what the actual outcomes are. The pressures are very different, right? We have the ecological collapse is a big thing that's happening here. The expansion of technology, especially the internet, is making it to where it's very difficult for them to silo information. Things are happening faster and faster. So when I look at a comparison of feudalism and capitalism, it seems to me that the sort of broad scale critique and displeasure with the feudal system has expanded far fast, or with the capitalist system, has expanded far faster and more intensely than feudalism did, which had many rebellions against it, which had many revolts by people who did not want to be subjugated by it, and had also many pockets of slave revolts of serf revolts and so on. But I don't think it reached the level of intensity, organization, and so on that the anti-capitalist movement reached already back in the late 1800s. So I think we're in a situation where probably they're not commensurate. I think it's going to be really hard for us to compare the two, and things could change at a much more rapid rate than they changed under feudal society. Thoughts on anarcho-transhumanism? I find it interesting. I commented a little more on the concept of transhumanism earlier. I don't really know the distinctions between, anarcho-transhumanism and transhumanism. So, yeah, I don't want to comment too much on that, as per what I said earlier, which is just that I would like to research more the specific delineations between post-humanism, transhumanism, anti-humanism, and humanism. In which, from what I've read so far, I seem to be in the post-humanism camp, and very against anti-humanism, problems with humanism, and transhumanism is interesting. I presented my thoughts on it earlier, and insofar as anarcho-transhumanism eliminates some of the aspects of essentialism, I think that's very good. And yeah, so have you read Capital? Why not? And do you think it's worth other people reading it? I have skimmed a great deal of Capital, read summaries of that and so on. And I think I actually read it in a really incoherent fashion way back when I was in Occupy. I read it really quick through and sort of skipped through the parts that I wasn't able to parse through. So in other words, I skipped through a lot of the early stuff. In the years since, I've read a lot more supplementary material, and I've gone back and read large swaths of it again. But since I've had a fully formed political perspective and understanding of political theory, I've not done a beginning to end reading of Capital. And that's actually something I think I should do, and I've considered doing. But yeah, when I read it when I was young, way back in my early 20s, I definitely had to move through a lot of portions that that were kind of going over my head at that point. But now I'd have a much better grasp of it, and I have a pretty good grasp overall of what is talked about in Capital. I've read several full summaries. What you know about rolling down in the deep? Nothing. That's it. Is there a place for shit posting / a little bit of trolling within revolutionary movements? I mean, I'm going to say yes. Me and you are constantly stirring the pot on Twitter, right? I mean, I shit post. People think I'm 100% serious on Twitter. It's like a solid 15% shit posting, or irony posting. I'm doing a little bit of trolling. I'm poking the hornet's nest somewhat often. So I think it works. It works just stirring up a little bit is fun, and I don't think it's a big deal. But I think the problem is it can turn into edgelord stuff. Have you heard of Max Tegmark's mathematical universe hypothesis? I have not. That sounds like mathematical realism, which I'm kind of uncommitted on. I would want to discuss through what his view on mathematics is. But let's see here. How would you define fascism? I think just the first kernel is just to say that it's palingenetic ultranationalism. But I think what fascism really represents to me is the desire to essentially reconcentrate power back into hierarchies, to re-centralize all of the hierarchies back together. The fascist is mourning the loss of the centralization of power and the conventional modes of social organization, the fact that the economy has fractured apart from politics, and that it seems as if there's all this bureaucracy when what they want is really the return to a sort of central dictatorial figure and the recreation of a pyramidal hierarchical structure. And so therefore they're often cooperating with monarchy and monarchists writ large. The common cooperation of fascists and monarchists is that for that reason. The big difference being monarchists are actually trying to really go back to monarchy, whereas fascists want all of they want like most of monarchy, but they are going to maintain a significant part of a market economy, just with the heads of industry colluding along with the other centralized structures in society. It also is highly reliant upon notions of national purity, typically ending up being racial purity, but sometimes just being nationalistic purity. The desire to return to a non-degenerated state, to return. They think, the teleology of fascism is that things were the best a long time ago and they just degrade and degrade and degrade and degrade. And we are in the highly degenerated state. That's the kind of at the core of fascism. So the core of fascism is then this desire to move backwards to what they saw as a more holistically concentrated hierarchy of power. Shortening that up, I don't know. It's hard to shorten that up. I think you've done a video on it, if I understand correctly. So you should know it's hard to summarize. Read Sylvia Wynter, somebody said. Yeah. I think I probably should read some Sylvia Wynter. During feudalism, the early bourgeoisie took a long time building up the power it needed to overthrow the state. Are there any worker institutions building up dual power to the state in the modern era? Yes. I would say we have, for example, Cooperation Jackson, but we actually have more examples. People are trying to create these projects elsewhere. Might I add, insofar as we're talking about a dual power, Rojava is actually a very good example because they exist within an area where there is a broader polity at hand. They're having to do a lot of cooperation, or essentially existing under the existence of the Syrian government, even though they are an autonomous region. They in many ways represent a broader scale outcome of dual power, essentially where the dual power is finally gaining its own autonomy from the existing power structure as it stands. The Zapatistas, I would say at first, were a dual power institution, but like Rojava have also gained a great deal of their autonomy and therefore have pushed through that stage and are now actually themselves have autonomous management of themselves. So yeah. Yeah. Are there any worker? Yeah. So that's the answer to that. So let's see here. Somebody asked, is he too old to get the joke? Answer's probably yes. Yes, probably so. Yeah, whatever the joke is, I probably am too old to get it. What you know about Italian man doing list? His list is pretty good. It's a little overly broad, but it's pretty good. It's the new thing people are trying to talk shit on. Okay, it's got value to it. There's value to numerous things on his list, and generally most of those are pretty what you should say, comorbid with the existence of fascism. Let's see here. Bellion, every manual Bellion. Okay. Weird question. But have you heard of the game called Extreme Meat Punks Forever, where you beat up fascists in a meat mech? I have not, but I'm interested. You've got my attention now. What's your opinion on land back? Why do you think people confuse it for ethno-nationalism so much? I'll go backwards here. And that is to say, I think they do that because they don't really understand what most land back advocates are asking. Now, you get all kinds of different things within the movement. Like, you've got people essentially just saying, respect the treaties that you signed with the tribes. That's like one approach. That would actually give a lot of land back. Okay. If all they did not essentially treat their treaties with the indigenous peoples of the United States or the indigenous peoples of America as like figments, as non-legal, but instead just respected them as actual legally binding documents, huge things would change. You would get a lot of land back, okay, in that process. But more broadly, you have a sort of revolutionary land back movement that is actually asking for a full return of these lands back to the indigenous peoples that once occupied them. That's a very complicated program. When you talk to people about what that will actually entail, it's going to depend on the person. It's going to depend on what kind of other politics they have, for example, and what they want how they want that to be instituted. So there are some pretty good papers that are written about the unifying factors, but I think you'll find that if you talk with people in the movement, that there's a significant diversity of thought. Now, as for why do people associate with ethno-nationalism? Because of like a knee-jerk defensiveness, a fear of now being subjugated. And it's kind of the same reason why people knee-jerk respond to Black nationalism. There's this conception that they're going to essentially get their land back and they're just going to do a fascism themselves. Like they're going to try to put in, a status nationalism in place. And once again, I don't think that that's what you'll find is the case with the majority of people in the movement. And I think you'll find, once again, that there's a significant diversity of opinion. And most people are essentially responding to this out of a knee-jerk in the same way that we would say abolish prisons, and they had no idea what that meant. And of course, it meant a lot of different things. Lots of different people meant different things by abolish prisons, and there are a lot of different answers depending on your politics. So same thing is true here. Let's hear your stance on sex work and pornography. Sex work is just work, and pornography, as long as it's not itself exploitative, it's not like overly damaging the autonomy and dignity of the people who are involved in it. The people who are involved are consenting, and there's no, then it's basically just another kind of work. It's just another kind of work, really. I would hope to see sex work, as all other work, return to having social ownership and management by the people who are involved in it, and not wealthy owners of these companies who in themselves are just are accumulating a large amount of the value that's created in these industries. Also, of course, if we're just talking about sex work writ large, we have to say, sex work on the streets, pimp relations are absolutely fucking awful. And there is no defense other than to say that people do what they have to do in order to live. We should not pass judgment upon the women and the men who are involved in these relations. We should want to get rid of those relations as much as possible and give them opportunities that are not as exploitative, obviously. But I do not have an opinion that sex work is different from other work, except for the obvious ways that any kind of work differs from one another. Thoughts on post-structural and post-left anarchism? I'm generally not very into post things. Like I'm a much more analytical mind. So a lot of the deconstructive traditions, which are very much about taking things apart and trying to find like internal contradictions, or trying to find out how they can't hold together, or there's not universality or overarching historical programs. Things that tend to have these sorts of approaches tend to not be very appealing to me. Not to say that I don't derive useful insights from them, but they're really not a representation of my sort of assessment of these issues. I think they're often far too deconstructive. They are far too reliant and emphasized upon critique and overemphasis of the subject as well. And I think that's definitely true of post-left anarchism, in my opinion. And post-structural anarchism, I'm only just going to assume includes some of those things. But I have only read very small amounts of post-left anarchism, and nothing that I know would be called post-structural anarchism. So take that with a grain of salt. Thoughts on the nationalism found in colonized, oppressed communities such as the Mapuche, Kurdish, Iroquois communities, etc.? Yeah, I mean, I think that what I really oppose is statist nationalism, right? I'm opposing a nationalism that seeks to exert itself through state entities. And I think that historically what you'll find is that anarchists, that's what they meant when they said nationalism. They didn't mean this more broad conception that we now kind of recognize in this discussion of nationalism. They meant a nationalism that was only about the state orientation. We now recognize something kind of, as you said, that's a little more broad and includes what other nations or what other often indigenous peoples or like pre-Westphalian state peoples have a different conception of what they mean by nation. And we should probably be a little more inclusive of that, I think, in the modern era. Anarchists should probably be careful when they hear the word nationalism to figure out what kind of nationalism we're talking about. Thank you for explaining the joke to me, Colin B. I needed that. Where are we at? Do you think anarchism can coexist with other libertarian socialist systems like council communism or democratic confederalism? Yes, 100%. I kind of motioned at that earlier, but insofar as the system carries out the necessary values, or is able to cooperate with an anarchistic society, I'm generally going to be okay with it. I think just what you'll find is that systems that tend to be more hierarchical can't. But the systems you've listed, council communism or democratic confederalism, would probably be very good allies to a purely anarchist society. I see them as council communism. Pretty much my only complaint is just that it's extremely economically reductionist. Has a real tendency to reduce everything down to labor conflict. But if they instituted the system they're talking about, they'd probably quickly end up figuring out communalism, to be honest, because you need the civil bodies. They're going to need to be local. You're not going to be able to do everything in workplaces. We don't live in a society where that would work. Democratic confederalism is really interesting, and especially if you just read the theory as it stands, not even necessarily all in practice, but the book Democratic Confederalism by Abdullah Öcalan is excellent, and I would really like if more people would read it. It's extremely educational about the Middle East, but it's also extremely educational about how Öcalan views the evolution of Bookchin's ideas within their tradition, and I think we'll anybody who goes and reads it will agree that it's a very libertarian socialist perspective, even almost anarchistic. Sorry if you've heard this question already. What are your thoughts on egoism, or at least egoist communism? Yeah, egoism. I mean, if you mean egoism broadly, right, then I would say I'm not a big fan of any kind of egoism in a broad philosophical sense. I don't like egoism. insofar as we're talking about like egoist communism, kind of like a individualist anarchist conception of how communism can be justified. I mean, if it works, like communism, okay, right? If it makes an liberatory society, cool. But I personally don't think that we should be justifying things starting from egoism. I think that there's an aspect of self-interest and there's an aspect of collective responsibility that needs to be understood in the struggle. And I don't think we're going to achieve communism without a mixture of those two. I don't think we're going to create a society where the rule is the satisfaction of individual needs that will produce the ethos for communism. But I understand, that there's lots of arguments to say that, well, it's within people's self-interest to practice the communistic society. And I think that's true in a broader sense. But I think when you've told people the justification is that it acts in your self-interest, then when the time comes when they might have to make a decision, which is very important, between whether they will balance the needs of their individual needs and the collective, or whether they will, choose themselves. I think that if you start from the presumptions of egoism, that there is a risk that they might choose themselves instead of choosing what is necessary, which is the broader collective cooperation. And that is also to say, I don't think people can always absolutely recognize their self-interest in the moment. I think that, in a broader sense, people can be brought to see their self-interest. But I think that if people are told choose your self-interest over any sort of subversion to the greater need, and that's not exactly what Stirner would say, but in a general sense, if egoism is your sole motivator, I personally think you're gonna see there's problems with people needing to choose selflessness for society to function and for them to even get good outcomes, but they won't be able to recognize it in the moment because they'll seek the satisfaction of their ego. And I understand, once again, Stirner gives lots of examples of the union of egoists and talking about how it's within people's self-interest to cooperate upon collective tasks. I've been reading The Unique and its properties, but I don't think that it's still assuaged any of my feelings about this topic. I think I still, even after reading a lot of what Stirner's saying in there, I think it still has the flaw that I'm describing here. What are your thoughts on the black socialists in America and their strategy? I'm a big fan. I have been promoting black socialists in America since they were a much smaller account. I have gotten to know several of the people who run it. I am happy to provide my skills whenever they are needed. I think their strategy is very good. I mean, I've already talked up Cooperation Jackson, and Black Socialists in America is closely intertwined with Cooperation Jackson and is part of the Symbiosis Network. And I consider them strong allies. I think they have a good strategy. They understand the issues pretty well. They have a very expansive theoretical breadth of knowledge, and are a great resource for learning, and have one great suggestions about the development of dual power and prefigurative praxis. As an anarchist, do you believe vaccines should be mandated? I don't. I mean, obviously, in an anarchist society, they couldn't be mandated without everybody just voting on it, right? And it should be said, I think the best solution is for people to vote ahead of time, that they think, essentially pass a resolution that, excuse me, that says, if an epidemic takes place, people should have to go get vaccines, and then they pass it beforehand, and then they just have to carry it out. Right? Instead of like voting on the spot, should we all get vaccinated every single time? I think it'd probably be more effective with things like that to kind of just establish the key response. I mean, the thing here is that we would want them to be mandated in a general sense, insofar as like what is our desired outcome. We would want everybody to get the vaccine, right? Like that's obviously the case. But an actual mandate can be pretty violent, and I would say in this society, I don't know. That's a harder discussion. In a future society, I would say you don't want to really create a system of mandates. What sort of mediums exist for people to communicate and network together? Discord, Twitter, something else? I mean, yeah, those are some options. Uh, sorry, give me a sec. I'll be right back. I just heard something break in the other room. Okay, just a little bit of disaster. We're fine. We've just a little bit of property damage. Everything's good. Um, let's see here. Oh, light. Okay, I'll finish that. What sort of mediums exist for people to communicate? Yeah, I would say Discord's probably one of the best ones right now. There are other ones in development, but I would suggest Discord. I mean, Twitter just to find people, but Discord is probably a really good place for your organization to use. Not good info security, but most of the alternatives won't have good info security either. So it's just kind of one of those things where just be smart about what you discuss, but it's a pretty good place to have your org based, basically. Lighthearted one before I go to sleep. Is the Federation in Star Trek socialist, fascist, something else? I don't know. It seems kind of like some like communist technocracy or something. Like it's like it's like they've abolished money. Okay, direct distribution. Okay, so it's pretty communist. Production based on ability. I mean, yeah, I guess so. But I don't really know about the broader Federation structure. Like I don't know about how the chain of command works and all that. So I won't weigh in too deep on that one. But at least their economics are pretty communist. But I wonder if they're like authoritarian. But then that would mean they have a state, so then they can't be communist. If they have a state and they're doing that, I don't know. That's a tricky one. I don't know enough about Star Trek. That's the truth. Oh, chair is a meme now, huh? Show us your tat. Boom! Oh, it's the cat. It's Sabo cat. I think I've showed it on every single stream so far. You're just avoiding the real controversial topics. It's true. I didn't weigh in on Star Trek. Do you think it's worth investing time in creating and writing about a democratic confederalism typed libertarian socialist ideology, which is instead adapted for America? Yeah, maybe. That'd be interesting. Yeah, definitely. That'd be cool. Yeah, write some stuff about that. Read a bunch of Oshalon and then write something like that. Read some Oshalon, read some Bookchin, and then yeah, give us something. I'd be interested to hear your take on that. Do you have any tips for community organizing? I am going to be putting all those tips in part 3 of this upcoming video. I would say first place you should look is Constructing the Revolution, where I give kind of a broad overarching strategy. Okay. Soon I'll be giving a lot more specific tactics. In a general sense, what I would say is find the place where the power structure is extracting its power. Who is it exploiting in order to get it? And then organize them towards the construction of a dual power. Organize with them. And then what is created, give it to the people who need it. Hand over a democratic structure that has actual power over to them. Work with them and earnestly try to free them from the damage that is being done. Organize upon the key issues of the areas that you are in and start there, and then expand, build more and more. There's so much to say about it that's the vaguest thing I could say. So I finally, for the very first time, reached the bottom of the chat. So now I'm going to Twitter. We're going to go to Twitter. We're going to see what people have asked. Oh, great. People are already memeing the couch. Memeing the chair. Okay, let's see. Let's find the stuff. Okay, so there's some people under here. Oh, there we go. There we go. Most of these have been answered now. Oh, okay. Do you think anarchism has become more popular in America since Occupy Wall Street? Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a big expander for anarchism as an ideology. Got a lot of people acquainted with the concept of horizontal power. Got a lot of people familiarized with the General Assembly model, which is very similar to how anarchist councils would be run. I think that it was very good for the expansion of anarchism, but it was also a very diverse movement. It had a lot in it. It was generally just anti-authoritarianism writ large, but you even had ANCAPs mixed in. It was a very different time in leftist organizing, I'll tell you that. But overall, yes, it had a very big effect on the spread of anarchism. It was one of the reasons why I'm an anarchist today, was because of organizing and Occupy. It taught me a lot of lessons, both positive and negative, about what the actual program that we are involved in will look like what it actually has to be. What are the necessities of this collective action that we're all involved in? It taught me a lot about that, and gave me a lot of really good avenues to learn about. It was where I first learned about the Zapatistas. It was where I first learned about the Indignados. I think it was very influential for me. Yeah, so I think it was probably influential for a lot of other people as well. It was also one of the reasons why we got so much anti-capitalist rhetoric just came into society. It was a large part because Occupy was so good at the spectacle. Oh my God, really good at the spectacle. I think that was one of the strengths of Occupy. So let's see. We got anything else? We got anything else from the Twitter? We got anything from the Twitters? Yeah, I think I got all the ones on the Twitter. There weren't that many this time. Maybe everybody was sparing me. I don't know. I'm also thinking that 3 hours and 15 minutes may be the point where I start asking if we're closing up. So I'm gonna catch up on the ones here in the chat, and then I think we're going to start winding down. Timeless asked, how would that work in a place like a school or a prison? I actually think that prison organizing is vastly underappreciated and should be and is an avenue for organization that a lot of people should really be considering and are really not considering the intense value of prison organization. I think that, for example, letter writing campaigns to people in prison, sending them radical literature if they're able to read that, if they're allowed. These or helping organize inmates towards asking for greater concessions from the prison system. And prison riots sound really scary, but sometimes they're the manner through which these prisoners get small concessions. They could be very valuable to organize. Also, organizing legal services for people who are wrongly convicted or anarchists, speaking with anarchists and radicals who are in prison and trying to keep their spirits high. These are all very valuable things. Also, just in a general sense, organizing for prison abolition is also very powerful. So organizing around prison is something that is not done nearly enough. Lorenzo Camboa Irvin, one of the most important Black anarchists of the modern era, said that he was turned into an anarchist in prison because of letters that people were writing to him, theory that he was exposed to by people who were speaking to him from the anarchist Black Cross, I think is what it's called. Is that right? Anarchist Black Cross. Yes, Anarchist Black Cross Federation. That was very important for Irvin. And so, I mean, just think about that, how much of a difference that could possibly make. Really just remember that these are people. They're experiencing an intense amount of misery and subjugation inside these prisons. They could very well in your area be some of the most important people to try to help. And especially in places where there's prolific state suppression, a lot of your political allies may be in those prisons, may be very, very valuable for you to try to help them and to raise their spirits, but also to organize for them to be treated in a better way and to perhaps be released more quickly and to give them sources for radicalization. Have you ever talked to other anarchist YouTubers such as Veritas, Et Caritas, St. Andrewism, Reeducation, or Britton Langle? Of those, yes, St. Andrewism. I mentioned that earlier on stream. The others, no. I don't even know. The only other one on the list I know is Reeducation. I haven't watched the other ones, but now that you've give them to me, I might go subscribe to their channel, see what they've got. I wonder if you've read Debord and if you have any thoughts on him. I have not read an entire work by Debord. I've read a lot of analyses of Society of the, or yeah, that's Guy Debord, right? Yeah, Debord, Society of the Spectacle. Yeah, sorry, for some reason, for a moment, I was like, was it Baudrillard? No, it's Debord. Yeah, no, I've read a lot about Society of the Spectacle. I've read considerable portions of Society of the Spectacle, but I've never read it all the way through. I wouldn't consider myself an expert on Debord by any means. Did you see Tim Pool? Oh, and what are my thoughts on him? I think Society of the Spectacle is one of the best things to come out of the postmodernist tradition. Remember, I was saying I have some kind of reservations about some things that are within postmodernism, but I think that what I'm looking for is I'm looking for construction rather than deconstruction. I think Society of the Spectacle is constructive as well as deconstructive, and that's very valuable. It gives us an actual toolbox, and I find that very useful. Did you see Tim Pool at Occupy Wall Street? I was not at Occupy Wall Street. I was at Occupy Tulsa. So You know, a friend of mine was at Occupy Wall Street, who is in fact present. And he just answered right after. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Tim Pool is mostly in New York. I did never meet him. I'm glad. Yes, the stream will be kept up. How can one do anarchist political education praxis through streaming? I'm hoping that I'm kind of doing something like that right now. I will say probably people could just do that by like doing streams that are like unrelated to anarchism, but making them related to anarchism, like being a video game streamer or something, but talking about anarchism all the time. That would be great, you know, especially if you get actually get really good at the game, and then people are like watching you because you're good at the game, but you're also giving them the anarchy pill. Yeah, there we go. That's praxis. I don't know. There's probably a variety of good answers to that, but he says, "Oh dear God," you know. Let's see here. What do you think about David Graeber? I think one of the greatest anarchist theorists of the modern era. I mean, he has very few competitors. He is. It is sad that he is only now recognized the sort of recognition he deserves after his death. So many more people began reading him afterwards. So many people began talking about him afterwards. He was very influential. He gave us very, very significant expansions on anarchist theory that I think a lot of people are probably not even familiar with. Like Debt is one of the most important books I ever read. Like it's very, very, it's an important piece of anthropology, as well as about political economy and the concepts of money and just the philosophical concepts of indebtedness and owing. I think Graeber really, you can't exaggerate his importance. I think he needs to be read more. Everybody should at least read Debt. But he's written several very important things. What do you think of the Among Us emergency meetings as a form of anarchist praxis? No, we're not doing Among Us. We're not doing it. We're not doing it. Have you ever spoken with Gelderloos? He follows me on Twitter, which is super cool, but I've never spoken with him. I think maybe we had like a message or two that we can, like, maybe I said something, he said something back, or vice versa. But no, I've never actually spoken with him, but I'd love to. Another important a theorist and historian who I would like to speak to. Very important guy. All right. Here we are, 3 hours and 20 in, and I think this is about time. We're going to be calling it for the day. But if you have made it this far, I would like to invite you to the Discord server. I'm going to put the link to the Discord server in the chat. And for a while, I'm going to keep it in the chat, and people can join if they like. Afterwards, if you're listening to this stream and you made it all the way to the end, you can maybe send me a message on Twitter or something, and maybe I'll send you the link. The main requirement is that you have to be a libertarian socialist or anarchist of some sort. We won't accept anybody onto the server who is not. So there, we're expecting a bunch of people to join in. I hope to see a bunch of new members. And okay, I think that's where we're going to end for tonight, everybody. It was good talking with you all, and I'll probably do another one, 8,000 or whatever, whenever that happens. At this rate, maybe it'd be a little while, but it was good talking with you, and talk to you soon.